Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a question that lingers in the minds of nearly every soul who has ever looked upon the golden giants of the Imperium and felt the weight of their presence settle into their bones. What does it take? What does it truly, honestly, in every conceivable measure of sacrifice and suffering and transformation, take to become one of the Adeptus Custodes? Because when you look at a custodian, you are not looking at a soldier. You are not even looking at a warrior. Not really. Not in the way that word is commonly understood. You are looking at something that exists on the razor's edge between human and divine. Something that was once an infant, cradled in the arms of a mother who would never see that child again, and was reshaped at the molecular level into a living weapon of such terrifying perfection that even the legendary space marines look upon them and feel, for perhaps the first time in their enhanced lives, something approaching inadequacy. So settle in, get comfortable, because this is a long story and it deserves to be told properly. We are going to walk through every stage of what it means to become a custodian. From the selection of candidates in the noble houses of terror, through decades of agonizing bioalchemical transformation, through training regimens that would break the minds of lesser beings, through the forging of auramite armor and the bonding with a guardian spear, and into the final realization of what it means to stand as one of the 10,000. We are going to explore the history of their creation, the science behind their making, the philosophy that drives their existence, and the terrible price that is paid by every single soul who walks this path. Some of them do not survive. Many of them, in fact, do not survive. And those who do emerge on the other side as something that is no longer entirely human, yet carries within them the very essence of what humanity was always meant to become. This is the story of the Adeptus Custodes, and it begins, as all the greatest stories of the Imperium do, with the Emperor of mankind. Long before the Imperium stretched its golden hand across the stars, long before the 20 Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of the warp, long before the Thunder Warriors roared across the blood-soaked plains of ancient terror, there were the Custodians. But the origins of the Custodian Guard are deliberately shrouded in mystery. Even the Custodians themselves possess only fragments of the full truth, and what records exist from those impossibly ancient times are sequestered in vaults that no living being outside their order has ever been permitted to enter. But what we do know paints a picture of creation that is staggering in its ambition and breathtaking in its execution. The Emperor of mankind, that singular and unfathomable being who had walked among humanity for tens of thousands of years before revealing himself, had been planning his rise to power for an age that defies comprehension. During the long nightmare of the Age of Strife, when terror was shattered into dozens of warring kingdoms ruled by techno-barbarian warlords and petty tyrants, as the Emperor began to assemble the tools he would need to unite humanity. And the very first of those tools, the very first creations born from his unmatched mastery of genetic science, were not the Thunder Warriors. They were the Custodians. Think about that for a moment. Before he created the armies that would conquer terror, he created his bodyguards. Before he built the weapons of war, he built the shields that would protect his person. This tells you something fundamental about the Emperor's priorities and about the nature of the Custodians themselves. They were never meant to be soldiers in the traditional sense. They were never designed to be mass-produced or expendable or part of some grand military machine. From the very beginning, from the very first moment of their conception in the Emperor's transcendent mind, well, the Custodians were intended to be something else entirely. They were to be companions, confidants, protectors of a being who could see the future and knew, with terrible certainty, that enemies would come for him from every direction. The earliest records we have of their existence come from the Unification Wars themselves. Upon the pillars of the Black Manse of Nassau, the capital of one of the first techno-barbarian strongholds to fall before the Emperor's advance, Ancient inscriptions describe the Lord of Lightning coming before the warlord kings flanked by 4 giants of crimson and gold, demanding their surrender. 4. In those earliest days, there were perhaps only a handful of custodians in existence, standing at the Emperor's side as he began his conquest of humanity's birthworld. Each one of them was a masterwork of genetic engineering, created through processes so complex and so deeply personal that the Emperor himself was said to have overseen every single aspect of their transformation. Decades later, when the wars intensified and the Emperor's domain grew, those 4 had become 30, and those 30 custodians, bearing guardian spears and clad in early patterns of augment armor, fought at the head of the newly created Thunder Legions during the assault against the formidable Moreland Sen Confederacy. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the early unification wars, and it was there that the distinction between the Custodians and the Thunder Warriors became devastatingly clear. The Thunder Warriors were blunt instruments, magnificent in their savagery, but crude in their construction. That they were created from adult males through rapid and often violent genetic modification, making them enormous and ferocious, but inherently unstable. Their bodies degraded, their minds frayed. They were built to burn bright and burn fast, the perfect weapons for conquering a single world in a single generation. The Custodians were something else entirely. Where the Thunder Warriors were hammers, the Custodians were scalpels. Where the Thunder Warriors were mass-produced prototypes, each Custodian was a unique work of art. The genetic enhancement that formed the Custodes was fundamentally different from anything that came before or after. It did not rely on crude implantation of artificial organs, as the later Space Marine process would. Instead, it used a process that the Imperium's scholars would come to call bioalchemy, in a method of triggering transformation at the cellular level, reshaping the subject's very DNA and biochemistry from the inside out. The effect took root in their cells and, some whispered, in their very souls. This distinction cannot be overstated. A Space Marine is created by taking a young man and surgically implanting him with a series of 19 specialized organs grown from gene seed, each one serving a specific function. It is a process that is, by the standards of the 41st millennium, relatively well understood and reproducible. Assembly line transhumanism, if you will, refined over 10,000 years into a reliable, if still dangerous, procedure. The creation of a custodian is nothing like this. It is closer to alchemy than surgery. It is closer to art than science. And it begins not with a young man, but with an infant. From the first step on the long and agonizing road to becoming a custodian is selection. And this is where the story takes on a quality that is almost mythological in its gravity, because the candidates are not chosen for their strength or their courage or any quality that they might demonstrate through action. They cannot be. They are far too young. The process of creating a custodian must begin during the subject's late infancy, no older than that, because the fundamental changes that will be wrought upon their flesh, their minds, and their very souls are so profound that only the most malleable of biological templates can survive them. Consider what this means. Somewhere on Terra, in the towering spires of the noble houses that have endured since before the age of strife, a child is born, a healthy infant, genetically unremarkable by most external measures, yet carrying within their DNA some invisible constellation of traits that marks them as a potential candidate for the most extraordinary transformation in all of human science. The family of this child may be one of the oldest and most powerful on Terra, a bloodline that has offered tribute to the Emperor for 10,000 years. It is considered a tremendous honor among the Terran nobility to submit a child for consideration. Not a demand, not a levy, an honor. Because the families understand, on some level that goes beyond mere politics or prestige, that their child is being offered the chance to stand in the Emperor's light, to become something that transcends the petty concerns of mortal existence. But the Adeptus Custodes do not rely solely on voluntary tribute. They also seek out suitable candidates through other means. Their agents move through the underhives and the hab blocks, through the pilgrim trails and the merchant quarters of the throne world, watching and evaluating and assessing with senses that go far beyond the merely physical. A custodian can perceive genetic potential in ways that most of humanity cannot begin to comprehend. They carry within them the Emperor's own understanding of human biology, a knowledge base that encompasses the accumulated wisdom of the dark age of technology and extends into realms of genetic science that the Adeptus Mechanicus can only dream of approaching. What exactly they look for, nobody outside the Order knows for certain. The criteria are one of the most closely guarded secrets in the Imperium, are locked away behind encryption codes and oath bindings that even the Inquisition has never successfully penetrated. But we can infer certain things from what is known. The process of bioalchemical transformation that creates a custodian requires an extraordinary degree of genetic compatibility. The modifications involved are so intricate, so deeply interwoven with the subject's existing biology, that only a vanishingly small percentage of candidates prove suitable for even the first stages. We are told that only one in many thousands of potential candidates might prove suitable for the simplest of the steps involved. One in many thousands. And that is just the beginning. When a child is selected, they are taken from their family with all the ceremony and reverence that the occasion demands. The parents may weep, though whether from grief or joy is a matter known only to them. They will never see their child again. The infant is carried into the depths of the imperial palace, into laboratories and transformation chambers that have existed since before the founding of the Imperium itself, and there the long process of becoming begins. It is worth pausing here to consider the emotional weight of this moment. In the far future, the sacrifice of a child to the Emperor's service is treated as the highest calling a Terran family can aspire to. But stripped of the religious veneer, it is a parent handing over their infant to be subjected to decades of genetic manipulation that may very well kill them. The survival rate through the full process is never explicitly stated in the records, but every source that touches on the subject makes it clear that failure is not uncommon. And failure, in this context, does not mean the child simply washes out and returns home. Failure means death, or worse. Some candidates are driven mad by the process. Others suffer catastrophic cellular rejection that consumes them from the inside out. One slight failure at any point in the decades-long transformation, and the candidate is, as the records coldly state, exterminated. This is the price of perfection. The Custodians do not tolerate imperfection, not in their ranks, not in their armor, not in their weapons, and certainly not in the genetic foundation upon which their entire existence is built. A flawed custodian is not merely a waste of resources. A flawed custodian is a potential threat to the Emperor himself, and no threat to the Emperor, no matter how small or theoretical, is ever permitted to exist. Now we arrive at the heart of the matter, the transformation itself. And here, we must be honest about the limits of what is known, because the process by which a custodian is created is one of the most closely guarded secrets in the entire Imperium. The Adeptus Custodes do not share their methods with anyone, not with the Adeptus Mechanicus, who would give entire forge worlds for a glimpse at the Emperor's genetic mastery, not with the Inquisition, whose authority theoretically extends to every corner of imperial society, not even, it seems, with the Primarchs themselves, those demigod generals who commanded the Emperor's legions during the Great Crusade. The knowledge belongs to the Custodians, and to the specialized cadre of geneticists who serve them, families of bioalchemists and chirurgeons whose own lineages stretch back to the very dawn of the Imperium, to the gene-wrights who aided the Emperor in his earliest experiments on Terra. These gene-wrights are descended from the original scientists who aided the Emperor with the Primarch project itself, long before the Imperium had even made contact with Mars. They are pledged solely to the Custodians, separate from all other organizations and institutions, maintaining an independence that predates the Adeptus Mechanicus by centuries. The Custodians do not trust even Mars with their secrets. These few families have retained knowledge from before there was an Imperium. It inherited wisdom passed down through generations of carefully selected and rigorously vetted practitioners. They are, in a very real sense, the keepers of the Emperor's oldest and most sacred science. What we do know about the transformation process can be pieced together from scattered references in imperial records, from the observations of those rare outsiders who have caught fleeting glimpses of the work, and from the Custodians' own cryptic statements about their nature. And what emerges from these fragments is a picture of a process that is equal parts terrifying and awe-inspiring. The transformation is described as an arcane and ancient process born from the mind of the Emperor himself. It consists of decades of alchemical augmentation, psychological and cognitive conditioning, and mimetic training. Here, let us examine each of these elements in turn, because each one represents a dimension of the transformation that is critical to understanding what a Custodian truly is. The alchemical augmentation is the physical foundation of the transformation. Unlike the Space Marine process, which involves surgically implanting a series of discrete, identifiable organs into the subject's body, the Custodian process works at a far more fundamental level. Bioalchemy is used to trigger the subject's own transformation, an effect that takes root in their cells and reshapes them from the inside out. This is not the addition of new parts to an existing machine. This is the fundamental re-engineering of the machine itself. Every cell in the subject's body is altered. Their DNA is rewritten, their biochemistry is recalibrated, their musculature, their skeletal structure, their nervous system, their cardiovascular system, every single aspect of their physical being is elevated to a level of performance that makes even the legendary Space Marines look like crude approximations of the transhuman ideal. The physical results are staggering. A fully transformed Custodian stands a full head taller than a Space Marine, and Space Marines themselves are already giants by human standards. Their strength, their speed, their reflexes, their sensory acuity, all of these exceed even the enhanced capabilities of the Astartes by a significant margin. Constantin Valdor, the first Captain General of the Legio Custodes, was recorded as being the same physical size as the Primarch Alfarius of the Alpha Legion, and while Alfarius was the smallest of the 20 Primarchs, this still places Valdor in a category of physical development that most observers would consider demigod-like. In combat, Custodians have been observed to cut through Chaos Space Marines with the same casual ease that those same Chaos Marines would dispatch ordinary humans. They move with a fluidity and precision that should be impossible for beings of their size, each movement the product of centuries of practice, refined to mathematical perfection. But the physical transformation is only one aspect of what is done to a Custodian candidate. The psychological and cognitive conditioning is, in many ways, even more profound. A Custodian is not simply a larger, stronger, faster human being. A Custodian is a being whose mind has been expanded and reshaped to operate on a level that most humans cannot even comprehend. They are scholars, philosophers, strategists, and diplomats, as well as warriors. The Emperor did not create the Custodians simply to fight. He created them to exist in his company, to serve as his conversation partners, to debate matters of philosophy and history and statecraft with a being of transcendent intellect. This means that the cognitive enhancements built into a Custodian's transformation are not merely functional upgrades to processing speed or memory capacity. They are fundamental expansions of the mind's ability to perceive, analyze, and understand the world in all of its overwhelming complexity. A Custodian can process information at speeds that would overwhelm an unaugmented human brain. They can hold multiple, simultaneous streams of tactical analysis while simultaneously engaging in close combat, or tracking dozens of variables in real time while executing killing strikes with flawless precision. They can recall with perfect clarity conversations that took place centuries ago, storing and accessing memories with a fidelity that no normal human mind could approach. They can read the subtle micro-expressions and bioelectrical signals of those around them with an accuracy that borders on telepathy, allowing them to detect lies, fear, hostile intent, and 1,000 other emotional states that most people are not even aware they are projecting. These are not merely useful combat skills. These are the tools of a bodyguard who must anticipate threats that have not yet materialized, who must see the assassin's blade before it is drawn, who must understand the political landscape of the Imperium well enough to predict where threats to the Emperor might emerge from the shadows years or even decades in advance. The mimetic training is perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the transformation process. Mimetic training involves the imprinting of vast quantities of information directly into the subject's neural architecture, bypassing the normal processes of learning and memory formation entirely. A custodian emerges from their transformation with knowledge that would take a normal human several lifetimes to accumulate. Tactical doctrines, weapon systems, historical records, political structures, diplomatic protocols, linguistic databases covering hundreds of imperial and alien languages. Thus, the full breadth of the Imperium's accumulated knowledge is compressed and encoded into their minds with a fidelity that beggars belief. But it goes beyond mere information. Mimetic training also instills behavioral patterns, combat instincts, and philosophical frameworks that shape the custodian's personality and worldview at the deepest level. It is, in essence, the creation of a complete psychological architecture, a mind designed from the ground up to serve one purpose and one purpose alone: the protection of the Emperor of mankind. And this is where we must confront an uncomfortable truth about the nature of the Custodians. Because when you reshape someone's mind at such a fundamental level, when you instill loyalty and purpose and identity through direct neural engineering rather than through experience and choice, are you creating a person or a weapon? The answer, as with so many things in the Imperium, is both. Each custodian retains their individuality. They have distinct personalities, preferences, fighting styles, and philosophical perspectives. They are capable of independent thought, creative problem-solving, and genuine emotional responses, though the range of those responses is significantly narrower than what a normal human might experience. They are, by any reasonable definition, sentient beings with inner lives and personal agency, but they are also, inescapably, the products of a design process that was intended to create the perfect servants of a being who valued utility alongside devotion in equal measure. The entire transformation process, from the initial selection of the infant candidate to the final emergence of a fully realized custodian, takes decades, not years. Decades, multiple decades in fact, during which the candidate is subjected to continuous modification, testing, and refinement. During this time, they are not isolated from all human contact. They are educated, socialized in their own particular way, and gradually introduced to the duties and responsibilities that will define their existence. But they are also constantly monitored, constantly evaluated, and constantly at risk of being deemed unsuitable and destroyed. It is a process of apotheosis, in the truest sense of the word, the elevation of a mortal being to something approaching the divine. And like all apotheosis, it demands a price that is measured not in currency or resources, but in the fundamental nature of the being who undergoes it. To truly appreciate what it means to become a custodian, it is essential to understand how the process differs from the more well-known creation of a space marine. Because while both are examples of the Emperor's mastery of genetic science, the comparison between them reveals just how extraordinary the custodian transformation truly is. A space marine begins as an adolescent male, typically between the ages of 10 and 16, selected for physical and psychological suitability from the recruiting worlds of his chapter. He undergoes a process of surgical implantation over a period of several years, during which 19 specialized organs grown from gene seed are introduced into his body. Each organ serves a specific purpose, as the secondary heart provides redundancy in the cardiovascular system. The os modulus strengthens the skeleton by secreting growth hormones that fuse calcium-based compounds into the bones. The biscopea enhances muscle growth through chemical stimulation. The catalepsian node allows the marine to remain alert without true sleep for extended periods. The preomnor enables him to digest almost any organic substance, no matter how toxic. The Becher's gland allows him to spit corrosive venom, and so on, through a series of 19 modifications that systematically enhance his body's capabilities while maintaining a basic architectural similarity to the human template from which he began. This process is remarkable in its own right, as it transforms an ordinary young man into a superhuman warrior capable of feats that would be impossible for unaugmented humanity. A space marine can survive wounds that would kill a normal person instantly. He can fight for days without rest, eat poison and survive, breathe in toxic atmospheres, and heal from injuries that would leave lesser beings crippled for life. But as impressive as these capabilities are, they are achieved through a process that is, by the Emperor's standards, relatively crude. It is a mass production process designed to create large numbers of enhanced warriors in a relatively short time frame. The gene seed can be cultivated, stored, and implanted by trained apothecaries working from standardized procedures. While complications and failures do occur, and while each chapter's gene seed carries its own quirks and potential flaws, the basic process is well understood and reproducible across the Imperium. The creation of a Custodian shares almost none of these characteristics. Where Space Marines receive discrete organ implants, Custodians undergo a holistic cellular transformation that affects every part of their being simultaneously. Where Space Marines retain a clear distinction between their original biology and their augmented components, Custodians are modified so thoroughly that there is no meaningful separation between what they were and what they have become. Where Space Marines can be created in a matter of years, Custodians require decades of continuous modification. Where Space Marines are produced in batches using standardized gene seed, and each Custodian's transformation is individually tailored, a bespoke work of genetic art that accounts for the unique characteristics of the specific candidate. And perhaps most significantly, the process of creating Custodians is only partly standardized. Certain unorthodox but useful traits may be created or amplified if an initiate shows unique potential, making the Custodians quite an internally diverse group of warriors, despite their shared origin. The results reflect these differences in every measurable way. A typical Space Marine is a formidable warrior, easily capable of defeating dozens or even hundreds of ordinary human soldiers in combat. A Custodian is something beyond even that. In the novels and records that describe encounters between the two, the disparity is consistently striking. During the Horus Heresy, a loyal Space Marines who witnessed Constantin Valdor in combat reported that the Captain General cut through traitor Space Marines with the same ease that those Marines would have dispatched ordinary humans. This is not exaggeration. The physical and cognitive advantages that a Custodian possesses over a Space Marine are comparable in magnitude to the advantages that a Space Marine possesses over an unaugmented human. But perhaps the most fundamental difference lies not in their physical capabilities, but in their minds. Space Marines are designed to function as part of a military unit. Their training, their conditioning, their entire psychological framework is built around the concept of brotherhood, of functioning as part of a greater whole, of subordinating individual initiative to the collective needs of the squad, the company, and the chapter. This is what makes them such effective soldiers. They fight as a unified force, each Marine anticipating the movements of his brothers, each one willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good of the unit. Custodians are the opposite in this regard. They are designed to fight as individuals. Each Custodian is a self-contained bastion of combat capability, a one-person army who can operate independently and effectively against any conceivable threat. Their training does not emphasize teamwork in the way that Space Marine training does. Instead, it emphasizes individual excellence, self-reliance, and the ability to assess and respond to threats without waiting for orders or coordinating with others. This is not because the Custodians are incapable of working together. When they do fight in concert, as they did during the war within the Webway and the Siege of Terror, they are devastatingly effective as a collective force. But their fundamental orientation is toward individual perfection rather than collective efficiency. And this shapes everything about how they fight, how they think, and how they relate to one another and to the wider Imperium. This individualistic approach extends beyond the battlefield. Each Custodian maintains and inspects their own equipment personally, rather than participating in the kind of regimented military parades and inspections that define Space Marine life. Each Custodian's armor is unique, crafted specifically for them, and decorated to reflect their personal history and achievements. Each Custodian develops their own fighting style, their own philosophical perspectives, and their own interpretation of their duty to the Emperor. They are, in the truest sense, individuals in a way that Space Marines, for all their heroism and dedication, are not always encouraged to be. This is by design. The Emperor did not create the Custodians to be soldiers. He created them to be companions, to stand beside him, to speak with him, to debate with him, to provide perspectives and insights that a mind as vast as the Emperor's might nonetheless find valuable. A being who speaks with the Emperor must be more than a weapon. They must be a person with all the complexity and nuance that personhood implies. And so the transformation that creates a Custodian preserves and enhances their individuality, even as it reshapes them into something more than human. But when the Emperor once remarked that it was humanity's nature for brothers to fight brothers, one of his Custodians responded that he would not know anything about it, because he had no brothers. That single exchange captures the essential solitude of the Custodian condition, the price of being made to serve a singular purpose above all bonds of fellowship and kinship. Behind the golden armor and the shining spears, behind the decades of transformation and the incomprehensible genetic science, there exists a group of individuals without whom the Adeptus Custodes simply could not exist. They are the gene-wrights, the bioalchemists and chirurgeons who actually perform the work of creating new Custodians. And their story is one of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of the entire Custodian creation process, as the gene-wrights are not members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. This is a critical distinction that separates them from virtually every other practitioner of advanced technology in the Imperium. While the Mechanicus claims dominion over all technology and all scientific knowledge within the Emperor's realm, the gene-wrights operate entirely outside their authority, answering to the Custodians alone. Their lineages trace back to the original geneticist cadres who served the Emperor during the very earliest days of his rise to power, long before the Treaty of Mars brought the Mechanicus into the fold of the Imperium. These families, if they can properly be called that, have maintained an unbroken chain of knowledge and practice that stretches back to the dawn of the Imperium and perhaps even further, into the darkness of the Age of Strife itself. The relationship between the gene-wrights and the Custodians is one of mutual dependence wrapped in layers of secrecy and ritual. The gene-wrights possess the knowledge necessary to create new Custodians, but that knowledge is not complete. It is fragmentary, handed down through generations of practitioners who each understood only a portion of the full process, their understanding deliberately compartmentalized to prevent any single individual from possessing enough knowledge to replicate or weaponize the Emperor's work independently. The full picture, the complete understanding of how a Custodian is made from start to finish, exists only in the cumulative institutional memory of the gene-wright families as a whole. And even then, there are gaps and mysteries that nobody can fully explain. And this is because the Emperor himself was the original architect of the Custodian transformation, and while he passed along enough knowledge for the gene-wrights to continue the work in his absence, he did not share everything. Some aspects of the process, particularly those that touch on the more esoteric and metaphysical dimensions of the transformation, may require an understanding of genetic science that no mortal mind is capable of grasping. The gene-wrights do their best with what they have, and the results speak for themselves, as new custodians continue to be created even 10,000 years after the Emperor's interment on the Golden Throne. But the process is slower than it was in the Emperor's time. Far slower. And it took the Emperor roughly 200 years to build the Legio Custodes to their full strength of 10,000 warriors. In the 10 millennia since his fall, the gene-wrights have managed to maintain approximately that same number, replacing losses as they occur, but never significantly expanding beyond the traditional cap. The math tells its own story. Where the Emperor could create custodians with the efficiency of a master artist, the gene-wrights are closer to apprentices working from notes they only partially understand, producing works of genuine magnificence, but at a fraction of the speed their master once achieved. The gene-wrights also play a role in monitoring the health and genetic stability of existing custodians. Unlike space marines, who are subject to gene seed degradation and mutation over the centuries, custodians appear to be genetically stable to a remarkable degree. They are, for all practical purposes, biologically immortal, aging so slowly that no custodian has ever been recorded as dying of natural causes. Their bodies simply do not deteriorate in the way that even enhanced human bodies do. This biological immortality is maintained in part through the ongoing ministrations of the gene-wrights, who perform regular examinations and subtle adjustments to ensure that each custodian's physiology continues to function at peak efficiency across the centuries and millennia of their service. But even the gene-wrights' considerable skills cannot prevent all degradation. Over the centuries and millennia of a custodian's existence, there is an imperceptible but measurable decline in certain capabilities. Our reaction times slow by fractions of a second. Muscle fibers lose a tiny percentage of their contractile efficiency. Neural pathways develop microscopic imperfections that affect processing speed by margins so small that they would be undetectable by any conventional measuring instrument. For any other warrior in the Imperium, these changes would be utterly insignificant, lost in the noise of normal biological variation. For a custodian, whose entire identity is built upon the pursuit of perfection, they are unacceptable. And this is how we come to one of the most remarkable and poignant aspects of custodian culture: the voluntary surrender of arms that precedes a custodian's departure from active service and their transition into the eyes of the Emperor. Imagine being the greatest warrior your species has ever produced. And imagine being faster, stronger, more intelligent, and more skilled than any other being in the galaxy, with the possible exception of the Primarchs themselves. Imagine having spent centuries, perhaps even millennia, honing every aspect of your physical and mental capabilities to a state of absolute perfection. And then imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you are a tenth of a second slower than you were the day before. For a normal person, a tenth of a second is nothing. It is less than the blink of an eye, a span of time so brief that it barely registers in the conscious mind. For a custodian, it is a death sentence of identity and purpose. Because if a custodian cannot function at the absolute peak of their capabilities, then they cannot guarantee the Emperor's safety. And if they cannot guarantee the Emperor's safety, then their entire reason for existing is called into question. This is the reality that awaits every custodian, eventually. Not death in battle, though that is always a possibility. Not failure of duty, though the fear of failure haunts them all, but the slow, inexorable erosion of the very perfection that defines them.
I'll take a second to say something here. Honestly, out of everything in 40k, the Custodians might be the faction that hits me the hardest on a personal level. And it's not because of how strong they are or how cool the golden armor looks, even though it does look incredible. It's because of what they gave up. These are beings that were made to be the most complete humans to ever exist. And the price of that completeness is that they can never actually live a human life. No real friendships, no family, no moment where they just get to exist without the weight of 10,000 years pressing down on them. They got everything except the one thing that makes any of it worth having. And I think that is what makes them such a fascinating piece of this universe. They're not tragic because something bad happened to them, they're tragic because everything went exactly as planned. And the plan itself was the tragedy. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Let's go back to the video.
The gradual dimming of abilities that were never meant to dim, the barely perceptible softening of an edge that was forged to remain sharp for eternity. When a custodian reaches this point, when they determine through their own ruthless self-assessment or through the diagnostics of the gene-wrights that they can no longer perform at the standard required of the 10,000, they do something remarkable. They do not fight the inevitable. They do not rage against the dying of the light. They accept it, act with a quiet dignity that speaks to the depth of their character, and they prepare to leave. The ceremony of departure is one of the most solemn rituals in the Custodian order. The departing warrior surrenders all of their equipment to the Hall of Armaments. Their guardian spear, which they have carried for centuries, and which has become as much a part of them as their own hands. Their auramite armor, that magnificent golden shell that has protected them through countless battles, and which bears the marks and decorations of a lifetime of service. Even their personal effects, the small mementos and tokens that accumulated over centuries of existence. Everything is given up, returned to the order that gave it to them, because none of it belongs to the individual. It all belongs to the Emperor. In place of their golden panoply, the departing custodian dons a simple hooded black robe. The contrast is deliberately stark. Where once they gleamed with the light of the Emperor's favor, now they are shrouded in the anonymity of a commoner. Where once they stood as giants among men, now they walk among the masses of humanity as just another face in the crowd. But their service is not over. Not truly. Because the departing custodians do not simply retire to some quiet corner of the Imperium to live out their remaining centuries in peace. They become the eyes of the Emperor, a secretive network of agents who spread across the galaxy in disguise, gathering intelligence and watching for threats that might endanger Terra and the Emperor. Wherever they travel, whatever identity they assume, they never stop watching. They cultivate networks of informants and agents, using their centuries of experience in espionage and counterintelligence to maintain awareness of the threats that lurk in every corner of the Imperium. When they identify a danger, they use secret channels to communicate a warning back to the Custodians on Terra, and those warnings have been responsible for launching preemptive strikes that have saved the Imperium from threats that most people will never even know existed. They use fear and intimidation when necessary to secure compliance where loyalty and honor will not suffice. They are the hidden hand of the Emperor, reaching out from Terra to touch the darkest corners of the galaxy. It is a noble role, and one that the eyes of the Emperor fulfill with the same dedication and purpose that characterized their active service. But there is something undeniably melancholic about it. Wow, these are beings who were created to stand in the Emperor's light, to bask in his presence, to serve as his companions and his guardians. And now they wander the galaxy alone, stripped of their golden armor, carrying nothing but their enhanced minds and their unshakable loyalty. They are the Emperor's cast-off swords, still sharp enough to cut, but no longer deemed worthy of his hand. Some of them, it is said, request to be interred within a venerable Contemptor dreadnought before they leave Terra, choosing the eternal half-life of an entombed warrior over the lonely anonymity of the eyes of the Emperor. Others accept their new role with something approaching equanimity, grateful for the chance to serve in a way that does not demand the impossible standard of perfection that defined their previous existence. And still others simply vanish into the void, their ultimate fates unknown even to the order that created them. The creation of a custodian does not end with their physical transformation. Indeed, in many ways, the transformation is merely the foundation upon which everything else is built. Because a custodian's training never truly ends. It continues for as long as they serve, a constant process of refinement and self-improvement that ensures they remain at the absolute cutting edge of combat capability. And at the heart of this ongoing training lies one of the most remarkable military exercises in the Imperium, the Blood Games. The Blood Games are exactly what they sound like, though the reality is even more intense than the name suggests. In a Blood Game, a Custodian is tasked with a deceptively simple objective: penetrate the defenses of the Imperial Palace and reach the Emperor. They must use every skill at their disposal, every trick they have learned, every technique of infiltration, disguise, and assassination to breach the most heavily fortified structure in the known galaxy. And they must do this while every other Custodian on duty is actively trying to stop them. Think about what this means. The Imperial Palace on Terra is not merely a building. It is a continent-spanning complex of fortifications, vaults, tunnels, shrines, and defensive installations that has been continuously expanded and improved for over 10,000 years. Its defenses include everything from automated weapons systems and void shields to psychic wards and dimensional barriers. While it is guarded by the 10,000 most lethal warriors in the galaxy, each one a genetically enhanced super being with centuries of combat experience. And a single Custodian, working alone, must find a way to defeat all of it. The Blood Games serve multiple purposes. First, and most obviously, they test the palace's defenses by subjecting them to the most realistic possible threat assessment. A Custodian playing the role of infiltrator brings to the task the same level of skill, intelligence, and resourcefulness that any real assassin or saboteur would possess, and then some. If a Custodian can find a weakness in the palace's security, then a lesser threat might also find that same weakness. By constantly probing and testing their own defenses, the Custodians ensure that their security remains as close to impenetrable as humanly possible. Or perhaps more accurately, as inhumanly possible. But the Blood Games also serve as training for the Custodians themselves, both for the infiltrator and for the defenders. The infiltrator hones their skills in stealth, disguise, improvisation, and unconventional thinking. They learn to think like an enemy, to identify and exploit weaknesses that they might otherwise overlook. The defenders, in turn, learn to anticipate the unexpected, to maintain vigilance against threats that can come from any direction at any time, and to respond to security breaches with the speed and decisiveness that the Emperor's protection demands. The records of specific Blood Games paint a vivid picture of the lengths to which Custodians will go in pursuit of their objectives. In one famous account, a Custodian named Amon Tauramachian returned to the Imperial Palace after spending an entire year on a Blood Game. During his infiltration, he used drugs to temporarily stop his own heart, allowing him to hide inside a cargo crate and fool the security systems that scanned it for life signs. He infiltrated the palace piece by piece, moving from shadow to shadow, exploiting every gap in the security network, until he finally stood before the Emperor himself with a blade raised to strike. He was intercepted at the last possible moment by Constantine Valdor, the Captain General, who appeared from seemingly nowhere to stop the killing blow. The fact that Tauramachian managed to get that close is itself a remarkable achievement. The fact that his success was treated as a valuable learning experience rather than a catastrophic security failure tells you everything you need to know about the Custodian mentality. They do not punish failure in the Blood Games. They learn from it. Every successful infiltration is analyzed. Every security weakness that is exposed is addressed. And every Custodian who participates, whether as infiltrator or defender, emerges from the experience sharper and more capable than before. Trajan Valoris, the current Captain General, is himself renowned for having completed 2 successful Blood Games, a record that remains unbroken and speaks to a level of infiltration skill that even among the Custodians is considered exceptional. The original inspiration for the Blood Games may have come from the Palace coup, a nearly successful rebellion during the Unification Wars. After that crisis was averted, Constantine Valdor recommended that the Custodian Guard hold regular war games to keep them alert. Another account attributes their inception to the Primarch Alfarius, who deliberately infiltrated the imperial palace during the early Great Crusade, slaying and stealing the identity of a custodian named Garudo. He managed to override one of the palace's defense turrets with the theoretical ability to shoot the Emperor's shuttle out of the sky. Whatever their origin, the Blood Games have become central to the Custodians' identity, a tradition that binds the present to the past and ensures that the lessons of history are never forgotten. Between the time of the heresy and the start of the Indomitus Crusade, yet the Blood Games evolved to include an even more extreme element. A specialized corps of Custodians was tasked with finding suitably powerful foes, including captured Chaos Space Marines, who were taken from across the galaxy and released within the Imperial Palace complex to test the Custodians' abilities against real enemies in real conditions. This was necessary because, during those 10,000 years of relative isolation, the majority of Custodians never left the grounds of the Imperial Palace. Without exposure to genuine combat against genuine enemies, there was a risk that their skills might atrophy, that their understanding of the threats they might face could become theoretical rather than practical. The Blood Games ensure that this never happens. Beyond the Blood Games, which Custodians spend their time between active deployments in a variety of pursuits that reflect their nature as both warriors and scholars. They study the arts of war, analyzing historical campaigns and developing new tactical doctrines. They practice the martial disciplines that they have spent centuries mastering, refining their skills in close combat, marksmanship, and the use of their specialized wargear through forms called katas, specialized combat disciplines mastered over decades or centuries, each equipping its practitioner to overcome particular types of foes. They engage in philosophical debate, discussing matters of statecraft, ethics, and the nature of duty with their fellow Custodians. And they maintain a constant awareness of the political landscape of the Imperium, of monitoring the activities of the High Lords of Terror and the various imperial institutions for any sign of corruption or treachery that might threaten the Emperor. A Custodian is not defined solely by their biology and their training. They are also defined by their equipment, and the wargear of the Adeptus Custodes represents the absolute pinnacle of imperial technology, artifacts of such quality and power that even the finest creations of the Adeptus Mechanicus pale in comparison. Custodian armor is crafted from a substance known as auramite, a material of unknown provenance and extraordinary resilience that is found nowhere else in the Imperium. Its natural coloration is a lustrous gold, which is why the Custodians gleam with that distinctive golden radiance that has become their most recognizable visual signature. But auramite is far more than just an aesthetically pleasing metal. It is said to be similar in composition to the ceramite used in Space Marine power armor, but superior in virtually every measurable characteristic. It is harder, more resilient, more effective at dispersing energy impacts, and possesses a unique property that makes it almost inert at a quantum level, which means it interferes far less with psychic energy than other protective materials. During the Siege of Terror, the Emperor wore his own auramite battleplate while fighting his immaterial battle with the powers of chaos within the warp. Bare skin would have been better for channeling psychic power, but without the auramite, the immense energies the Emperor unleashed would have burned his flesh to the bone. Each suit of Custodian armor is unique, custom crafted for its specific wearer by artisan families who have served the Custodians since the Imperium's founding. The right shoulder guard depicts the Imperial Aquila, the double-headed eagle that serves as the symbol of the Emperor's authority. The left shoulder guard is colored to indicate the Custodian's shield company affiliation, changed through alchemical processes rather than mere paint. The armor is adorned with precious gems, harvested from deep beneath Terra's surface, and hand-cut by skilled artisans. Their coloration matched not only across the individual Custodian's armor, but across the entire shield company. The Alaris pattern Terminator armor, used by the heaviest assault elements, is driven by magnetomic generator shrines and fashioned from layered auramite and adamantium, in providing protection so thorough that its wearer can stride unharmed from the blast of a macro cannon shell. And then there is the Guardian Spear, perhaps the most iconic weapon in all of the Imperium's vast arsenal. It is an elegant and deadly creation, a halberd-like power weapon that incorporates a power blade of devastating cutting ability and a highly advanced integrated bolter weapon. In the hands of a Custodian, it can be spun in great arcs, striking enemies with each rotation, whether in close combat or from range. The power field surrounding the blade is capable of cutting through a Chaos Space Marine's power armor as if it were paper. Some Guardian Spears mount exotic weaponry in place of the standard bolter, including Adrathic Destructors that fire directed energy, disintegration beams of phenomenal destructive potential, or weapons so dangerous and so ancient that they are entrusted to no organization outside the Emperor's household. One of the most unique and revealing aspects of Custodian culture is their naming tradition. When a Custodian completes their transformation, they receive a name drawn from the ancient cultures and mythologies of old Earth. Names like Ra, after the sun god of ancient civilizations. Names like Constantin, echoing the emperors of antiquity. Names like Diocletian, Ammon, Archaetus, each one a thread connecting the Custodian to the vast history of the species they have sworn to protect. But this first name is just the beginning. Over the course of their centuries-long service, Custodians earn additional names, each one awarded in recognition of a specific deed of valor or significance. And these names are inscribed onto the inside of the warrior's battle armor, or in some cases, directly into their bones, as marks of individual pride and achievement. The accumulation of names serves as a living record of service, a biographical chronicle written in words rather than medals or commendations. The most famous example is Constantin Valdor, who had earned 1,932 names before the Siege of Terror. By the 41st Millennium, a book containing his complete name filled an entire volume, 1,932 separate deeds, each one extraordinary enough to be immortalized. Ra Endymion, the tribune who would sacrifice himself to contain the daemon Drachnian, had earned 871 names. Each number represents not just an accomplishment, but a story of sacrifice, of courage, of duty fulfilled against impossible odds. To understand the full measure of what it means to be a Custodian, we must look at the moments in history when the 10,000 were tested to their absolute limits. And there is no better example of this than the war within the Webway. When Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, used forbidden sorcery to breach the psychic wards around the Imperial Palace, he inadvertently tore open a portal to the Webway deep within the palace's dungeons. Through that breach poured an endless flood of demons, screaming entities of malice and madness that surged toward the heart of terror itself. The Emperor dispatched the Custodians and the Sisters of Silence to hold the line, and so began a war that would last 5 years and reduce the Legio Custodes from 10,000 to approximately 1,000. The war was waged in the twisting corridors of the Webway itself, a dimension where the laws of physics were mere suggestions and the enemies were limited only by the nightmarish imagination of the warp. The Custodians established blockades across the Webway tunnels, launching counterattacks to keep the demonic horde off balance, while Mechanicum workers repaired the damaged sections behind them. 2 of the 3 commanding tribunes were killed during the fighting, leaving Ra Endymion in sole command. The cost was staggering. 9,000 Custodians, each one a unique masterwork of genetic engineering that had required decades to create, perished in defense of the Webway portal. Greater demons fell upon the Golden Defenders. The walls of reality itself bent and screamed under the pressure of the warp's assault. And still the Custodians held. In the war's final confrontation, after 1,000 Psykers were sacrificed to briefly sustain the Golden Throne in the Emperor's absence, the Master of Mankind entered the Webway in person. He created a burning star of golden psychic energy that forced the demons back. But the demon Drachnien, the echo of the first murder, could not be destroyed. The Emperor sealed it within the body of Ra Endymion and ordered the tribune to flee into the depths of the webway, running endlessly to prevent the demon from breaking free. Ra's fate remains one of the great mysteries of the Imperium. He may still be running, somewhere in those infinite corridors, the demon trapped within him screaming for release. Almost immediately after the webway was sealed, the Siege of Terror began. The 1,000 surviving Custodians, unhardened by 5 years of unrelenting warfare against demons, threw themselves into the defense of the Imperial Palace against the traitor legions. They held their positions with a ferocity that stunned even the Chaos Space Marines. Loyal Space Marines who witnessed the Custodians in combat during the siege reported scenes that defied description. Golden warriors cutting through traitor Marines as if they were unarmored mortals, holding choke points against overwhelming numbers, fighting in the shadow of the Eternity Gate with a refusal to yield that bordered on the supernatural. The Custodians proved particularly deadly against the forces of chaos. Their gene-forged nature, their direct connection to the Emperor's own genetic material, made them anathema to the corruptions of the warp. Even the Death Guard, bloated and empowered by Nurgle's blessings, found themselves at a severe disadvantage against the Golden Warriors. Hundreds of the putrid traitors fell to Golden Blades in devastating counterattacks that disrupted siege operations and bought precious time for the defenders. At the siege's culmination, Constantin Valdor teleported aboard Horus's battle barge alongside the Emperor, fighting through traitors and demons in a desperate attempt to reach his master's side. The Captain General was badly wounded, impaled by a power sword, beset by the elite Justaran Terminators, outnumbering his force by more than 30 to 1. But he kept fighting, the Apollonian spear in his hands never stopping, cutting through the enemy with a fury born of 10,000 years of devotion. In the aftermath, the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne, and the Custodians accepted this restriction not because they were ordered to, but because they agreed with its wisdom. They had failed to protect the Emperor from the ultimate threat, the betrayal of his own sons, and they would not risk his safety again by dividing their attention between the defense of the palace and the wars of the wider Imperium. For 10,000 years, the Custodians maintained their vigil. They rebuilt their numbers slowly, the gene-wrights working tirelessly to create new Custodians, to replace the thousands who had been lost in the Webway War and the Siege of Terror. They honed their skills through the Blood Games, tested their defenses against captured enemies, and maintained their readiness for the next great threat. They watched over the Emperor in silence, their golden forms standing sentinel in the shadows of the throne room, a living wall between the master of mankind and whatever darkness might seek to claim him. It was a period of stagnation in some ways. The wider Imperium raged and burned, assailed by enemies on every front, and the Custodians did nothing. Worlds fell to chaos invasions, alien incursions, and internal rebellions, and the 10,000 stood their ground on terror and watched it happen. For some Custodians, this was an agonizing existence, a duty that demanded inaction in the face of injustice. For others, it was simply what they were created to do, and they performed that duty with the same quiet dedication that characterized everything about their order. But the vigil was not without incident. The Imperial Palace, for all its defenses, was not immune to the machinations of those who would see the Emperor destroyed. Over the millennia, the Custodians thwarted countless plots, assassination attempts, and infiltrations that never made it into the official histories of the Imperium. The Blood Games ensured that their skills remained sharp, but real threats provided the ultimate test of their readiness. Some of these threats came from within the Imperium itself. Ambitious nobles, power-hungry high lords, and even rogue elements within the Inquisition occasionally overstepped their bounds and found themselves face to face with the golden fury of the Emperor's personal guard. These encounters rarely ended well for the trespassers. The organizational structure of the Custodians also evolved during this long vigil, though the changes were subtle and incremental, as befitting an order that measured time in centuries rather than years. The command structure remained relatively informal by the standards of imperial military organizations, with ranks serving more as gestures of respect toward veterans and gifted individuals than as rigid elements of a hierarchical chain of command. At the top sat the Captain General, the supreme commander of the order and one of the most powerful individuals in the Imperium. Below the Captain General were two tribunes, senior officers who served as his lieutenants and who took command in his absence. During the Horus Heresy, there had been 3 tribunes, but the loss of Ra Endymion in the webway had reduced the number permanently. Below the tribunes were the shield captains, experienced veterans who led individual squads and shield companies in the field. The rank of shield captain existed concurrently with other titles such as prefect, lictor, proconsul, and tribune, creating a web of overlapping authorities that would have been confusing in a more rigid military organization, but which suited the Custodians' individualistic nature perfectly. Each shield captain was expected to operate with a high degree of autonomy, making tactical and strategic decisions based on their own assessment of the situation, rather than waiting for orders from above. The Custodians were organized into formations known as shield companies and shield hosts, each tailored to specific operational requirements and threat profiles. A shield company typically consisted of a contingent led by a shield captain, including a few squads of Custodians, a Vexillus Praetor bearing the company standard, a Virtus Praetor squad mounted on Dawn Eagle jet bikes, and an Alaris Terminator squad for heavy assault operations, along with accompanying vehicles. A shield host was a larger formation consisting of multiple shield companies, led by several shield captains, and overseen by a council of Vexillus Praetors. Within the broader organizational structure, Custodians belonged to different castes determined by their wargear and battlefield role. The Hikanatoi formed the main strength of the Custodian Guard, heavy infantry equipped with guardian spears who represented the backbone of any Custodian deployment. The Sentinel Guard served as the defensive formations of the Custodes, tasked with defending emissaries, protecting critical facilities, and holding the line against enemy onslaught. These warriors possessed a greater level of teamwork than most Custodians, fighting in coordinated defensive formations that could absorb and redirect the force of even the most ferocious assault. The Custodian Wardens represented an elite tier, even among the 10,000, warriors whose skill was acknowledged as standing above all others. They served as exemplars and informal mentors, their very presence on the battlefield elevating the performance of every Custodian who fought alongside them. Then there were the shadowy warders of the Vaults of Rhython, a sub-force deployed deep within the most secure and most dangerous sections of the Imperial Palace. What exactly they guarded in those ancient vaults was known to only a handful of individuals. But the fact that the Custodians deemed it necessary to permanently station warriors there spoke volumes about the nature of the threats that lurked beneath the surface of terror. The nerve center of the Custodian Order was the Tower of Hegemon, a command and control facility located within the Imperial Palace complex. From here, the shield captains and tribunes coordinated the defense of the palace, analyzed intelligence from the eyes of the Emperor, and planned operations ranging from counter-assassination strikes to full-scale military deployments. The Tower of Hegemon was one of the most secure locations in the Imperium, protected by layers of physical, psychic, and electronic defenses that made even the rest of the palace look lightly guarded by comparison. What set the Custodians apart from other Imperial military organizations was beyond their genetic superiority and their peerless wargear was the depth and breadth of their martial training. While Space Marines typically trained in a particular style associated with their chapter, with Ultramarines favoring disciplined tactics and White Scars preferring mobile warfare, Custodians were expected to master a vast array of combat disciplines. The Katars, as these forms were known, represented the accumulated martial wisdom of 10,000 years of continuous practice and refinement. Each kata was a complete system of combat, encompassing not just physical technique, but also tactical philosophy, psychological conditioning, and even the manipulation of the battlefield environment. Some katas were designed for specific enemies. There were forms optimized for fighting Chaos Space Marines, which accounted for the unpredictable mutations and demonic enhancements that such foes might possess. There were forms designed for combating orcs, which exploited the greenskins' predictable aggression and poor coordination. There were forms tailored for the lightning-fast strikes of the Eldar, forms built around the relentless advance of the Tyranids, and forms specifically developed for the mechanical precision of the Necrons. A Custodian was expected to be proficient in dozens of katas and to be able to switch between them seamlessly in the heat of combat, adapting their fighting style to the enemy at hand with the effortless grace that came from centuries of practice. This versatility was one of the key factors that made the Custodians so devastatingly effective in combat. Or where a Space Marine might find himself at a disadvantage when facing an enemy that his chapter's particular fighting style was poorly suited for, a Custodian could simply shift to a different kata and continue the fight without missing a beat. The vehicles fielded by the Custodians deserved closer examination because they represented some of the most advanced military technology in the Imperium. The Dawn Eagle jet bikes were perhaps the most visually striking, sleek and deadly machines that combined the speed and maneuverability of a conventional jet bike with the devastating firepower of a light attack vehicle. Equipped with hurricane bolters or the feared salvo launchers, and ridden by Virtus Praetors who combined their superhuman reflexes with the machine's own advanced targeting systems. Or the Dawn Eagles could sweep across a battlefield with the speed of thought, delivering precise strikes against enemy command elements and then vanishing before retaliation could be organized. The Coronis Grav Carrier served as the primary transport for Custodian forces, a massive gravitic vehicle that combined heavy armor protection with the smooth, silent movement that characterized all Custodian grav vehicles. Unlike the comparatively crude rhinos and razorbacks used by Space Marine chapters, the Coronis floated above the ground on a cushion of invisible force, impervious to mines and improvised explosive devices, and capable of traversing terrain that would stop a tracked vehicle dead in its tracks. Its twin Arachnus blaze cannons provided formidable fire support. Yes, and its transport capacity allowed it to deliver a full squad of Custodians directly into the heart of an engagement. The Caladius Grav tank was the Custodians' primary battle tank, a vehicle whose firepower rivaled that of vehicles many times its size. Equipped with an Iliastus accelerator cannon that fired energy projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, the Caladius could destroy enemy armor at ranges that most Imperial vehicles could not even detect, let alone engage. Its secondary weapons, typically a pair of Lastrum bolt cannons, provided additional anti-infantry capability, making the Caladius a versatile and supremely dangerous presence on any battlefield. The technology that powered these vehicles was derived from the same Dark Age of technology archives that had given the Imperium so many of its most advanced systems, but the Custodian variants were maintained and operated at a level of efficiency that the broader Mechanicus could only envy. The Land Raider variants used by the Custodians were equally impressive. Where a standard Land Raider was already one of the most formidable ground vehicles in the Imperium, the Custodian versions were upgraded with Auramite armor plating, enhanced gravitic stabilizers, and weapon systems that drew on the same ancient technology base as the rest of the Custodian arsenal. These vehicles were typically reserved for the most dangerous operations, when the Custodians needed to deliver their heaviest units directly into the teeth of an enemy position with absolute certainty that they would arrive intact and combat-ready. The Telemann Heavy Dreadnought deserved particular mention among the Custodians' war machines. While the Contemptor Dreadnought was already a formidable platform for any Space Marine, the Telemann was something else entirely, a massive walking fortress that combined the firepower of a light tank with the close combat capability of an entire squad of Terminators. Piloted by a mortally wounded Custodian whose consciousness had been preserved within the machine's neural interface, the Telemann was a terrifying sight on the battlefield, its massive form advancing with the deliberate, unstoppable purpose that characterized all Custodian war engines. Each Telemann was unique, its weapons load customized to the preferences and expertise of its pilot, and the experience of the ancient warrior within made each one an invaluable asset in combat. The Custodians' relationship with the wider Imperium was a complex one, defined by duty and distance in equal measure. They were the emperor's personal guard, answerable to no one but the master of mankind himself, and this independence sometimes brought them into conflict with other imperial institutions. The Inquisition, which claimed the right to investigate any potential threat to the Imperium, regardless of its source, occasionally found itself at odds with the Custodians when their investigations encroached upon the palace or its surrounding territory. These confrontations were invariably resolved in the Custodians' favor, because no inquisitor, however powerful, could compel the emperor's own guard to yield their authority. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintained a complicated relationship with the Custodians as well. On one hand, the tech priests of Mars revered the technology that the Custodians wielded, seeing in their auramite armor and gravitic vehicles the echoes of the dark age of technology that the Mechanicus existed to preserve and venerate. On the other hand, the Custodians' refusal to share their technical secrets was a source of perpetual frustration for the Fabricator General and his subordinates. The gene-wrights' independence from Mars was a particular sore point, representing as it did a body of scientific knowledge that existed entirely outside the Mechanicus' monopoly on technology. Among the most notable Custodians to have served the Emperor, in beyond Constantin Valdor and Ra Endymion, were warriors whose names echoed through the millennia of imperial history. There was Diocletian Koros, a tribune who played a crucial role during the war within the Webway, serving as one of the senior commanders and ultimately being tasked with the desperate mission of securing reinforcements from Terra as the imperial position in the Webway deteriorated. Diocletian's account of the Webway War, preserved in the Custodians' own archives, provided one of the most detailed records of the conflict and the sacrifices that the 10,000 made to preserve the Emperor's life. There was Ammon Tauramachian, whose legendary blood game infiltration had already been discussed, but who was also notable for his role during the early stages of the Horus heresy. When Valdor informed Tauramachian of Horus's betrayal upon his return from the blood game, the Custodian's reaction was one of measured assessment rather than shock or anger. He immediately began planning counterintelligence operations, demonstrating the practical, analytical mindset that characterized the Custodians' approach to even the most devastating revelations. Valdor then assigned him the critical task of investigating Ferrum Sishar, the Lord of High Brazil, for evidence of treason, a mission that would have far-reaching consequences for the defense of Terra. In the modern era, Valerian and Alea represented a notable partnership between a shield captain of the Custodians and a Sister of Silence. Their cooperation during the defense of Terra and subsequent campaigns illustrated the growing integration between the two ancient orders, a development that would have been unthinkable during the Long Vigil, but which became increasingly common under Valoris's forward-thinking leadership. The Sisters of Silence, with their blank gene that rendered them invisible to psychic perception, complemented the Custodians' own formidable anti-warp capabilities, creating combined forces that were particularly devastating against the forces of chaos. The galaxy split open. The Great Rift, a wound in reality that stretched from one end of the galaxy to the other, tore the Imperium in half and plunged countless worlds into darkness. Warp storms of unprecedented intensity raged across the cosmos, cutting off entire sectors from communication and reinforcement, and on Terra itself, the forces of chaos struck a blow that no one had believed possible. A vast horde of ornate demons, led by 8 bloodthirsters of terrifying power, tore through the fabric of reality and assaulted the Lion's Gate of the Imperial Palace. The Battle of Lion's Gate, as it came to be known, was a nightmare scenario that the Custodians had spent 10 millennia preparing for. Demons pouring through the veil of reality to attack the Emperor's own doorstep, a repeat of the horror that had begun with the breach of the Webway portal during the heresy. Captain General Trajan Valoris, the 17th holder of that august title, and perhaps the deadliest individual warrior in the entire Imperium, enacted the catastrophe protocols and personally led a force of 4,000 Custodians from the Lion's Gate to meet the invaders. They fought alongside the newly resurrected Primarch Reboot Guilliman and his Ultramarines, who had arrived from Luna in the wake of the Terran Crusade. The battle was savage and costly, with noble Custodians who had stood guard over the Emperor for thousands of years, brought low by the brazen weapons of the Blood God's hateful demons. But in the end, the defenders prevailed. One by one, the 8 bloodthirsters were destroyed, and the surviving demons were driven back into the warp. The aftermath of the Battle of Lion's Gate forced the Custodians to confront a reality they had been avoiding for 10,000 years. The defenses of Terra, while formidable, were not impregnable. But the servants of the Dark Gods had bypassed the defenses of humanity's cradle world. The best defense, as the old saying goes, is found on offense. And so, behind locked doors and layers of psychic protection, Trajan Valoris and Rebuta Guilliman ratified a formal amendment to the role of the Adeptus Custodes. The imperial palace would still be guarded. The companions would continue their watch within the Emperor's throne room, but the Custodians would also extend their operations beyond Terra, taking the fight to the Emperor's enemies wherever they might be found. This was a seismic shift in the Custodians' identity and purpose. For the first time in 10,000 years, golden warriors were seen on the battlefields of the wider galaxy, their gleaming armor and crackling spears, a sight that inspired awe and terror in equal measure. Shield companies were dispatched to reinforce beleaguered Imperial forces, to eliminate threats before they could reach Terra, and to serve as the Emperor's heralds and emissaries to the scattered forces of the Imperium. The Custodians followed Guilliman's Indomitus crusade across the galaxy, often serving as the vanguard of torchbearer fleets that brought the technology of the Primaris Space Marines to existing chapters. Trajan Valoris himself led forces in several pivotal engagements. At the Battle of Gathalamor, he commanded a combined force of Custodians and Grey Knights against the Wordbearer's traitor legion, wielding the legendary Watcher's Axe and the mysterious Moment Shackle, an artifact from ancient Terra whose exact capabilities remained classified. And some whispered that the Moment Shackle allowed Valoris to perceive fragments of the immediate future, which would explain his uncanny ability to anticipate enemy movements and make tactical decisions that seemed impossibly prescient. Others suggested it had something to do with the return of Guilliman, though how the two events might be connected was a matter of speculation. Before ascending to the rank of Captain General, Valoris had served as an Alarus Custodian, earning fame for his destruction of the Space Hulk Mournful Siren and the elimination of a Genestealer cult that had infiltrated the outer reaches of the Sol system. His rise through the informal ranks of the Custodians was characterized by a combination of tactical brilliance and a willingness to challenge the conservative orthodoxy that had governed the Order for millennia. Where his predecessors had been content to maintain the vigil and wait for threats to come to them, Valoris argued that the changing nature of the galaxy demanded a more proactive approach to the Emperor's defense. Under Valoris's command, the Custodians experienced something of a renaissance. The number of blood games increased tenfold, ensuring that the Order's readiness was at its absolute peak. Long-hidden cults were purged from the polar underhives of Terra. Threats that had lurked undetected for centuries exposed and eliminated with ruthless efficiency. 32 separate extrasolar interdiction strikes were launched against emerging threats, each one planned and executed with the meticulous precision that only the Custodians could bring to bear. While the defenses of the stable warp routes into the Sol system were strengthened and expanded, incorporating new technologies and defensive doctrines developed in response to the changing nature of the Great Rift. Perhaps most significantly, the Custodians began to work more closely with other Imperial institutions under Valoris's leadership. The Grey Knights, the Imperium's secretive anti-demon force, found in the Custodians a natural partner whose genetic resistance to warp corruption complemented their own psychic abilities. The resurrected Sisters of Silence, whose blank gene made them anathema to all things psychic, formed a particularly effective partnership with the Custodians, creating combined forces that could engage the most dangerous warp-spawned threats with unmatched effectiveness. Even the Inquisition, which had historically viewed the Custodians' independence with suspicion, found common cause with the Golden Warriors as the scale and severity of the threats facing the Imperium forced traditional rivalries to take a back seat to simple survival. The era Indomitus represents a new chapter in the story of the Adeptus Custodes, a chapter in which the Golden Warriors of Terra have emerged from their self-imposed isolation to take their rightful place as the most powerful military force in the Imperium. It is a chapter written in blood and gold, in sacrifice and victory, and it is still being written today, with every battle fought and every enemy vanquished in the Emperor's name. We have spoken at length about what a Custodian gains through their transformation. The enhanced body, the expanded mind, the centuries of training, whilst the magnificent Wargear. But to tell this story honestly, we must also speak about what is lost. Because the creation of a Custodian is not merely a process of addition, it is also a process of subtraction, a stripping away of qualities that are fundamental to the human experience. A Custodian does not experience emotions the way a normal human does. This is not to say that they are emotionless, that they are cold machines incapable of feeling. They are not. But their emotional range is narrower than a normal human's, their responses more controlled, their reactions more measured. The transformation that creates a Custodian does not merely enhance their cognitive capabilities. It also reshapes their psychological architecture, suppressing certain emotional responses that might interfere with their ability to perform their duty. Fear, for example, is almost entirely absent from a Custodian's emotional repertoire. Not because they are incapable of recognizing danger, but because the fear response, the instinctive urge to flee from threats, has been engineered out of their psychology. They can assess danger rationally and respond to it appropriately, but the visceral, gut-level terror that would paralyze a normal human in the face of a greater demon simply does not exist within them. Constantine Valdor himself admitted to feeling something close to fear only once, during the Siege of Terra, when he found himself separated from the Emperor aboard the Vengeful Spirit, surrounded by demons, and realized that he might not be able to fulfill his duty. Even then, the sensation did not stop him from fighting. It did not slow his hand or cloud his judgment. And it was merely noted and set aside, another data point in the endless calculation of threat and response that defined a Custodian's existence. Similarly, the bonds of affection and camaraderie that characterize human social relationships are muted in Custodians. They do not form the deep, brotherly bonds that define Space Marine chapters. They do not have the easy warmth of shared experience that comes from fighting and living and dying alongside people you love. The Emperor deliberately designed them this way, some sources suggest, so that they would share a bond with no one except the Emperor himself. A Custodian who loved their brothers as a Space Marine loves his would be a Custodian who might hesitate at a critical moment, choosing to save a friend rather than protect the Emperor. Such hesitation is unacceptable. This emotional constraint extends to the Custodian's relationship with the rest of humanity as well. Custodians do not easily relate to normal humans, and normal humans find the Custodians distant, intimidating, and even alien. There is a fundamental disconnect between a being who was created to serve a single purpose and the messy, contradictory, emotionally chaotic mass of humanity that the Emperor created them to protect. Custodians understand humanity in the abstract as a concept and a duty, but they often struggle to connect with individual humans on a personal level. The mortal servants who attend to the Custodians' needs within the Imperial Palace have reported that their golden masters treat them with a distant courtesy that never quite crosses the threshold into warmth. They are polite, even kind in their own way. But there is always a wall between them and the humans they interact with, a barrier of enhanced perception and controlled emotion that prevents genuine connection. This isolation is compounded by the Custodians' awareness of their own nature. Unlike Space Marines, who are generally not given to philosophical introspection about the nature of their existence, the Custodians are designed to think deeply about everything, including themselves. They know that their emotions have been shaped by design. They understand that their loyalty to the Emperor is at least partly the product of neural engineering rather than free choice. And this knowledge creates a subtle but persistent existential tension, a quiet awareness that the line between devotion and programming is thinner than most of them would like to admit. As some custodians have grappled with this tension more openly than others. During the long vigil, small philosophical schools emerged within the order, each offering a different perspective on the nature of custodian identity and duty. The Dread Host School argued that the distinction between designed loyalty and chosen loyalty was meaningless, that the end result, unwavering dedication to the Emperor's protection, was all that mattered regardless of its origin. The Shadowkeeper's school took a darker view, suggesting that the custodian's designed nature was itself a kind of prison, and that true freedom could only be found through the perfect execution of duty, transforming the cage of their programming into a cathedral of purpose. The Emissaries Imperator School, which gained prominence in the era Indomitus, argued that the custodian's greatest purpose lay not in the physical defense of the Emperor, but in the preservation and projection of his ideals across the galaxy. None of these philosophical positions were formally recognized by the Order's leadership, and individual custodians were free to adopt, modify, or reject any of them as their own thinking evolved. But their existence spoke to the depth of intellectual life that thrived within the golden walls of the Imperial Palace, a rich tradition of philosophical inquiry that would have surprised those who saw the custodians as nothing more than glorified bodyguards. Each custodian carries within them a fragment of the Emperor's genetic legacy. They are, in a very real sense, his children, how more directly connected to him than even the Space Marines who carry the gene seed of his Primarch sons. This connection gives them a perspective on the Emperor that is fundamentally different from the one held by the rest of the Imperium. Where the Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor is a god to be worshipped, the custodians know him as a father, a creator, and a being of transcendent but ultimately mortal origin. They do not worship him, they serve him, which is a very different thing. This distinction has placed the custodians in an uncomfortable position relative to the ecclesiarchy and the broader religious institutions of the Imperium. The custodians know, or at least believe they know, that the Emperor did not wish to be worshipped as a god. His original vision for humanity was one of secular enlightenment, a future in which superstition and religion would be replaced by reason and science. The fact that the Imperium has evolved into a theocratic empire in which the Emperor is venerated as a deity is, to the custodians, a bitter irony. But they do not act against the ecclesiarchy because they recognize that the Imperial Creed, however much it distorts the Emperor's original intentions, serves a functional purpose in maintaining the cohesion and morale of the Imperium's vast population. Sometimes, the custodians have learned, duty requires the acceptance of imperfect outcomes. Within the ranks of the 10,000, there exists an elite within an elite, a select group of 300 custodians, known as the Companions. These are the warriors who stand closest to the Emperor, who guard the Sanctum Sanctorum and the throne room itself, who serve as the final, unbreakable line of defense between the master of mankind and whatever forces might seek to harm him. The Companions are chosen from among the most skilled, the most experienced, and the most psychologically stalwart of all custodians. To be selected as a companion is considered the highest honor that a custodian can receive, a recognition that you are deemed worthy of standing in the Emperor's physical presence and guarding his broken form with your life. The selection process is rigorous beyond description, encompassing evaluation of combat skills, psychological stability, resistance to psychic corruption, and 1,000 other criteria that the custodians consider essential for a warrior who will stand within arm's reach of the most important being in the galaxy. The Companions never leave the Emperor's side. While other custodians may be deployed on missions throughout the Imperium, the Companions remain within the throne room at all times, their golden forms arrayed in silent vigilance around the Golden Throne. They watch over the Emperor through the endless hours, their enhanced senses attuned to every fluctuation in the chamber's ambient conditions. Every whisper of air that might indicate an unauthorized presence, every subtle shift in the psychic emanations that radiate from the throne itself. It is a duty that demands a particular kind of fortitude. Standing guard in the throne room is not like standing guard on a wall or a gatehouse. The golden throne radiates psychic energy of staggering intensity, a constant bombardment of the Emperor's power that would destroy an unprotected mind in seconds. Even the companions, what with their enhanced psychic resistance and their direct genetic connection to the Emperor, feel the weight of that power pressing against their consciousness every moment of every day. Some describe it as a warmth, a sense of the Emperor's presence that sustains them through the long hours of their watch. Others describe it as a pressure, a constant reminder of the magnitude of the being they serve and the terrible consequences of failure. A few have described moments of what they believe to be communication, fleeting impressions or emotions that they interpret as the Emperor's awareness of their presence, though whether these experiences represent genuine psychic contact or simply the product of minds strained by constant exposure to psychic energy is a matter of ongoing debate within the Order. As the Captain General personally oversees the companions, and it is through them that access to the Emperor's physical form is controlled with absolute authority. No one enters the throne room without the Captain General's permission. Not the High Lords of Terror, not the leaders of the Adeptus Mechanicus, not even, in certain extreme circumstances, the representatives of the Inquisition. The companions answer to the Captain General, and the Captain General answers to the Emperor alone. In this one matter, the authority of the Adeptus Custodes is absolute and non-negotiable, a fact that has been reinforced with varying degrees of violence on the rare occasions when someone has been foolish enough to challenge it. But to truly understand the Custodians as a fighting force, we need to look more closely at the named shield hosts that have defined their military identity, particularly in the era Indomitus, when these formations took on a new significance as the Custodians expanded their operations beyond Terra for the first time in millennia. These are not chapters in the Space Marine sense. They are not permanent organizations with fixed rosters and unchanging traditions. They are more like philosophical alignments, operational specializations that a Custodian might gravitate toward based on their temperament, their skills, and their understanding of how best to serve the Emperor. A Custodian might serve with one shield host for centuries and then move to another when the needs of the Order demand it. The flexibility is the point. In a galaxy where threats are unpredictable and ever-changing, the rigid organizational structures are a liability. The Shadowkeepers are perhaps the most unsettling of all the shield hosts, and their existence speaks to truths about the Imperium that most of its citizens would find impossible to accept. Clad in sable armor rather than the traditional gold, the Shadowkeepers are the wardens of the dark cells, a network of sealed chambers and rune-locked vaults buried so deep beneath the Imperial Palace that their exact location is known only to the Lock Warden and his closest lieutenants. And within those cells are things that should never see the light of day. Horrors from the Age of Strife, entities and artifacts from the Old Night that predate the Imperium, predate the Emperor's rise to power, predate, in some cases, the evolution of human consciousness itself. Things that cannot be destroyed are only contained. Things that press against their bonds with a patient malice that would drive a normal mind to screaming madness within seconds of exposure. The air in the corridors that surround the dark cells is thick with dread. Not metaphorical dread, not the poetic suggestion of unease, but an actual physical sensation that permeates the walls and the floor and the very atoms of the air itself. Even the Custodians, with their enhanced psychic resistance and their iron discipline, feel it pressing against their consciousness like the weight of an ocean above a deep-sea diver. The Shadowkeepers patrol these corridors in perpetual vigilance, their ancient weapons drawn and ready, their senses attuned to the slightest fluctuation in the wards that keep the horrors contained. Many of these warriors are Custodian wardens, whose oaths of protection help them focus on their duty to the exclusion of all else. And the weapons they carry are not the standard guardian spears of the wider order, but artifacts of mysterious provenance, designed specifically for use against whatever might break free from the cells. For 10,000 years, the Shadowkeepers performed this duty in silence and in secret. But the opening of the Great Rift changed everything. The surge of warp energy that accompanied the Rift's birth did not merely empower the enemies of the Imperium. It reached down into the dark cells and loosened bonds that had held for millennia. Some cells were found empty, their occupants spirited away by forces unknown. Other cells showed signs of stress, their wards flickering and failing under the increased psychic pressure. The Shadowkeepers, as for the first time in their history, were forced to send warriors out into the galaxy to track down escaped prisoners and recapture or destroy artifacts that had been freed by the Rift's opening. It was a terrifying development, not merely because of the threat these entities posed, but because it forced the Shadowkeepers to reveal, however obliquely, that such things existed at all. The Dread Host represents an entirely different approach to the Custodians' mission. Where the Shadowkeepers are guardians and wardens, the Dread Host are executioners. They are the Emperor's wrath made manifest, a force designed to strike at emerging threats with such overwhelming violence that the very memory of opposition is erased from the minds of those who witness their attacks. Their specialty is the preemptive strike, yet the sudden application of devastating force against enemies who do not yet realize they have drawn the attention of Terra's golden guardians. When the Dread Host deploys, it is not to defend or to contain, it is to annihilate. Their preferred martial kata is the Dakatarai, an aggressive fighting form that allows Custodians to deal with hordes that vastly outnumber them by effortlessly managing the ebb and flow of combat. In a Dakatarai engagement, the Custodian becomes a golden cyclone of violence, their weapons never ceasing their deadly arcs, every movement flowing seamlessly into the next strike, so that there is no pause, no gap, no moment of vulnerability that an enemy could exploit. The Dread Host favors deep strike operations, using the ancient teleportation technology aboard Custodian warships to materialize directly in the midst of enemy formations. The psychological impact alone is staggering. One moment, the enemy is going about their business, whether that business is marshalling for war, conducting dark rituals, or simply existing in defiance of the Emperor's will. The next moment, towering golden figures are among them, weapons already swinging, already killing, the air around them crackling with displaced energy from the teleportation and the activated power fields of their weapons. The confusion, the terror, the absolute helplessness of facing warriors of this caliber without warning or preparation, all of it is by design. The Dread Host does not merely destroy their enemies, they make examples of them. But the Solar Watch occupies a unique position among the Shield Hosts. While the Shadowkeepers guard what lies beneath, and the Dread Host strikes at threats beyond, the Solar Watch patrols the space around Terra itself, maintaining a constant vigil over the Sol system and the approaches to humanity's homeworld. They are the outriders of the 10,000, the swift and merciless sentinels who ensure that nothing approaches Terra without the knowledge and consent of the Custodians. Their warriors favor speed and mobility, and the Solar Watch maintains a larger contingent of Virtus Praetors, those golden warriors who ride the devastating Dawn Eagle jet bikes, than any other shield host. Their armor is distinctive, bearing the marble white and crimson that mark them as the Watchmen of Sol, and their operational tempo is relentless. While other Custodians might spend decades between active deployments, the Solar Watch is perpetually in motion, patrolling the shipping lanes, inspecting incoming vessels, and maintaining the network of augers and sensor stations that form Terra's early warning system. Then there are the emissaries Imperatus, and their role is perhaps the most fascinating of all, because it represents something genuinely new in the Custodians' 10,000-year history. The emissaries are the Emperor's heralds, warriors who carry his authority and his message to the far corners of the galaxy. During the Indomitus Crusade, when Reboot Guilliman launched his desperate campaign to reunite the shattered Imperium, A large number of emissaries imperatus stepped forward, compelled by what they described as the spirit of the emperor himself, in to accompany the crusade and serve as envoys to the Space Marine chapters who would receive the gift of Primaris reinforcements. Their presence ensured that even chapters the Primarch did not visit personally understood the gravity of what they were being offered. When a golden giant of terror arrives at your fortress monastery, carrying the authority of the emperor and the blessing of a returned Primarch, even the most conservative and suspicious chapter master takes notice. The emissaries fight with a style that emphasizes adaptability and endurance. Their preferred approach is to ignore any modifiers or penalties that the enemy might impose, whether physical, psychic, or technological, and simply continue executing their mission with relentless precision. This makes them extraordinarily difficult to counter. Because the tactics that work against other forces, the disruption of targeting systems, the deployment of psychic interference, the use of terrain and cover to blunt an assault, simply do not work against warriors who have been trained to fight through anything and everything that stands between them and the completion of their objective. The Aquilan shield deserves mention as well, though their function is less about direct combat and more about the ancient and sacred duty of personal protection. The Aquilan shield are the bodyguards of the bodyguards, custodians who are assigned to protect specific individuals that the Order has deemed vital to the Emperor's interests. These might be Imperial commanders leading critical campaigns, inquisitors pursuing investigations that touch upon matters of existential importance, or even, in rare cases, Space Marine officers whose survival is considered essential to the defense of a sector or a system. The Aquilan shield operate with subtlety and discretion, often appearing without warning in the vicinity of their charge, and departing just as suddenly once the threat has been neutralized. Many of the individuals they protect never even know they were being guarded, which is exactly how the Custodians prefer it. Beyond the shield hosts, the ancient caste system of the Custodians deserves closer examination because it reveals the depth and complexity of their organizational structure in a way that the more visible formations do not. During the Great Crusade, the Custodians were divided into several specialized castes, each with its own traditions, training regimens, and areas of expertise. Yet the Ephoroi were perhaps the most secretive of all. Their name derived from a Greek word meaning overseers, and their function was exactly that: covert operations, counterintelligence, assassination, and infiltration. During the Great Crusade, it was said that the Ephoroi effectively commanded the Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's official organization of assassins, though the nature of that relationship was deliberately obscured even in internal records. The Blood Games, those elaborate tests of the palace's defenses, were organized under the auspices of the Ephoroi, and all participants were temporarily attached to this caste for the duration of their service. In the modern Imperium, the Ephoroi's role has evolved but not diminished. That their intelligence-gathering capabilities feed directly into the operations planned at the Tower of Hegemon, and their agents work alongside the eyes of the Emperor to maintain awareness of threats throughout the galaxy. The Thoranatoi were the heavy assault specialists of the Custodian Order, warriors who wore the heaviest armor and wielded the most destructive weapons available to the 10,000. In the modern era, these are the Alarus Custodians and the Aquilon Terminators, towering figures in massive Terminator plate, who serve as the Order's siege breakers and shock troops. The Alarus Pattern Terminator armor is a masterpiece of engineering, driven by magnetomic generator shrines and layered with auramite and adamantium to a degree that makes it virtually impervious to conventional weapons fire. An Alarus Custodian can stride through a firestorm that would reduce a Space Marine Terminator to slag and emerge on the other side with nothing more than scorch marks on their golden plate. They carry Castellan axes or Guardian spears, alongside forearm-mounted ballistus grenade launchers, drum-fed weapons that can be triggered by thought alone, spitting salvos of sanctified projectiles in saturation patterns, or launching concussion grenades that explode in bursts of electro-exorcist chaff. Enemies subjected to these barrages are sent reeling, their senses overwhelmed, and their equipment failing even before the Custodian closes to melee range. The Sagittarum Guard were a subunit of the Tharanotoi caste, and they were among the least common of all Custodians. Their primary role was the elimination of enemies from a distance using devastating heavy firepower, a specialization that might seem at odds with the Custodians' reputation as close combat specialists, but which reflected the Order's practical understanding that not every threat could be met with a blade. The Sagittarum carried weapons of terrifying power, including Adrastus bolt calivers that fired mass reactive shells of such size and destructive potential that a single round could destroy a light vehicle. The Cataphractoi were the jet bikers of the Custodian Order, warriors who mounted the sleek and deadly machines that allowed the Custodians to project their power across battlefields with staggering speed. In the modern era, these are the Virtus Praetors who ride the Dawn Eagle jet bikes, and their role has expanded to include not just battlefield reconnaissance and fast attack, but also the patrol and defense of the Sol system under the direction of the Solar Watch. The Cataphractoi also operated the Custodians' fighters and gunships, maintaining a small but formidable fleet of atmospheric and void-capable craft that could provide close air support or interception capabilities as the situation demanded. And then there were the Moritoi, the smallest, and in many ways the most tragic of the Custodian castes. The Moritoi were those Custodians who had been mortally wounded in battle and interred within dreadnought chassis, their consciousness preserved within the machine's neural interface so that they could continue their service even after their bodies had been destroyed beyond recovery. As the Custodians held long philosophical debates about the nature of the Moritoi, questioning whether the warrior within the machine was truly alive or had passed into a state that defied simple categorization. The consensus, if it could be called that, was that the question was ultimately irrelevant. The Emperor had decided to preserve these warriors, and that decision was all the justification that was needed. But the debates continued in the quiet hours between battles, a testament to the Custodians' restless intellectual nature and their refusal to accept easy answers to difficult questions. Let us turn now to the weapons themselves, because the Custodians' arsenal is as varied and as carefully considered as every other aspect of their existence. And each weapon tells a story about the warriors who wield them and the enemies they were designed to destroy. We have already discussed the Guardian Spear in some detail, but the Castellan Axe deserves equal attention because it represents a fundamentally different combat philosophy. Where the Guardian Spear is an instrument of precision, a weapon designed for the rapid flowing strikes that characterize the Custodians' standard fighting style, the Castellan Axe is a weapon of raw, devastating power. Its blade is heavier than the spears, designed not for precision cuts, but for crushing, cleaving blows that exploit the Custodians' superhuman strength and the axe's own tremendous momentum. The combat style that accompanies the Castellan Axe is elegant in its brutality. It had a series of thunderous sweeps that switch direction with breathtaking suddenness, each change of momentum designed to bypass the enemy's guard and deliver killing strikes to vulnerable points. The wielder uses their axe like a weighted pendulum, letting the weapon's mass do the work, guiding it through arcs that grow faster and more devastating with each revolution. Veterans who have seen Custodian wardens fight with Castellan axes describe the experience as watching a controlled avalanche, a force of nature given direction and purpose, but no less terrifying for its discipline. The Castellan Axe incorporates the same integrated bolter technology as the Guardian Spear, allowing the wielder to fire concentrated volleys of bolt rounds from the weapon's haft, engaging enemies at range while closing to melee distance. This dual capability means that a Custodian armed with a Castellan Axe is never truly at a disadvantage, regardless of the engagement range. The most famous Castellan Axe in the Custodian's arsenal is the Watcher's Axe, the weapon of the Captain General. This master-crafted artifact was fashioned in the wake of Constantin Valdor's disappearance and has been passed down to each successive Captain General ever since. Its blade crackles with golden lightning, and can bisect the armored sarcophagus of a chaos hellbrute with a single swing. The bolter integrated into its haft is known as the Eagle's Scream, and it fires adamantium-tipped penetrator bolts at a ferocious rate that would be more appropriate for a vehicle-mounted weapon than a handheld one. The Sentinel blade represents yet another approach to combat, one that prioritizes defensive capability without sacrificing offensive power. It is a broadsword of daunting size, so large that its hilt is flanked with the double barrels of a bolt caster capable of laying down a hail of short-range fire. That a Custodian can wield this massive weapon one-handed is itself a testament to their superhuman strength. The Sentinel blade is typically paired with a storm shield, creating a combination that makes the wielder almost impossible to bring down through conventional means. The storm shield is not merely a slab of armored material, but an active defense system, incorporating a built-in energy field generator that can absorb and dissipate the energy of incoming attacks. When a Custodian armed with Sentinel blade and storm shield takes a defensive stance, they become a wall of golden ceramite and crackling energy that even the heaviest weapons struggle to penetrate. And then there is the Misericordia, a weapon whose significance extends far beyond its physical dimensions. It is a dagger, a long-bladed weapon carried at the hip by Custodians, and at first glance, it might seem incongruous alongside the massive spears and axes that constitute the Order's primary armament. But the Misericordia carries a symbolic weight that few other weapons in the Imperium can match. Its name comes from an ancient Terran word meaning mercy, and that is precisely what it represents. It is the weapon a Custodian uses to deliver the killing blow to a defeated enemy, the final stroke that ends suffering and grants the peace of death. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, as every Custodian carried a Misericordia as a matter of course. But in the aftermath of the heresy, as the Custodians withdrew into the Imperial Palace and entered the Long Vigil, many chose to set their Misericordias aside, viewing themselves as unworthy of the right to deliver the Emperor's mercy after they had failed to prevent the heresy. In the era Indomitus, as the Custodians once again take to the stars, the Misericordia has seen a resurgence, with many warriors choosing to carry it once more as a sign that they have reclaimed their sense of purpose and their right to act as the Emperor's executioners. The Custodians also field some of the most exotic ranged weapons in the Imperium's arsenal. The Adrathic weapons deserve particular elaboration, and because they represent technology so ancient and so dangerous that entire wars were fought on pre-Imperial Terra solely over the possession of unearthed caches of these devastating devices. Adrathic weapons fire a directed energy beam that severs the internal bonds of matter, causing objects caught in their path to simply unravel in a spectacularly destructive manner. A target struck by an Adrathic beam does not burn or explode or shatter. It comes apart, its molecular structure dissolving in a flare of energy that leaves nothing behind but an afterimage. The Adrathic Destructor is the portable variant, typically integrated into a Guardian Spear variant, known as the Adrasite Spear, wielded by the heavy shock troops of the Tharanatoi caste against the deadliest of expected foes. The Adrathic Devastator is a heavier pattern mounted on jet bikes and light vehicles, while the Adrathic Exterminator is a vehicle-mounted variant of staggering destructive potential. These weapons are relics of the Dark Age of technology, gathered exclusively to the Emperor's household and entrusted to no other organization in the Imperium. Among the more specialized roles within the Custodian Order, the Blade Champions stand apart as warriors of singular focus and extraordinary skill. A Blade Champion is not merely a Custodian who happens to be good with a sword. They are individuals who have dedicated centuries to the pursuit of personal martial perfection, spending years in the Imperial Palace's Colossea Auris, of vast training arenas where the fighting arts are practiced and refined to a degree that would be inconceivable for any other warrior in the galaxy. The Blade Champions have developed their own unique fighting forms that go beyond the standard katas practiced by the wider order. The Behemoth form, for instance, teaches clinical strikes designed to penetrate even the toughest hide or heaviest armor, finding and exploiting weaknesses that less skilled warriors would never perceive. Other forms emphasize speed or deception, or the ability to fight multiple opponents simultaneously, each one honed to a razor's edge through centuries of practice against the most dangerous sparring partners in the Imperium, other Custodians. When a blade champion takes to the field, their purpose is singular: to seek out the enemy's greatest warrior, get their most fearsome champion, their most dangerous leader, and destroy them in single combat. This is not mere battlefield grandstanding. It is a calculated tactical decision based on the understanding that the removal of a critical enemy leader can collapse an entire army's morale and coordination in seconds. A blade champion moves through the chaos of battle like a golden thread through a dark cloth, weaving between lesser combatants, ignoring threats that do not serve their purpose, their entire being focused on reaching and destroying their designated target. When they find their quarry, the combat that follows is often brief, but always spectacular, a display of martial skill so far beyond the human norm that witnesses describe it as watching something choreographed rather than spontaneous. Every movement flowing with a perfection that defies the chaos of the battlefield around them. We should speak as well about what happens when a Custodian falls in battle, because death among the 10,000 is treated with a gravity and a significance that reflects the immense value placed on each individual warrior. When a Custodian dies, on terror itself, it is said that the bell of lost souls tolls once. This is the great bell that hangs in the Tower of Heroes within the Imperial Palace, and its sonorous voice can be heard across the entire palace complex. It rings only for the deaths of the greatest servants of the Imperium, and the fact that it rings for every Custodian tells you something about the regard in which they are held. The sound of the bell is described as a resonant note that seems to vibrate in the bones rather than the ears, a sound that carries with it a weight of sorrow that can bring even hardened warriors to a moment of stillness and reflection. The body of a fallen Custodian, if it can be recovered, is treated with the utmost reverence. Their armor is carefully removed and returned to the Hall of Armaments, where it is cleaned, repaired, and prepared for the day when it might be reworked for a new Custodian, though many suits are instead preserved as memorials, displayed in the halls of remembrance, alongside the name and deeds of their former wearer. The Custodian's gene seed, such as it is, cannot be harvested in the way that a Space Marine's can, because the Custodian process does not work through implanted organs, but through a holistic transformation of the entire organism. When a Custodian dies, everything that made them what they were dies with them. There is no continuity, no legacy passed from one generation to the next through shared genetic material. Each Custodian is truly unique, and when they are gone forever. This fact lends an additional weight to every Custodian's death that is absent from the losses suffered by Space Marine chapters. When a Space Marine falls, his gene seed can be recovered, and through it, some essential spark of the Primarch's legacy passes to the next generation of warriors. The chapter endures even as individuals fall, but the Custodians have no such mechanism of continuity. Each one is a fresh creation, laboriously crafted over decades from a unique combination of raw genetic material and the Emperor's own artistry. Or the loss of a Custodian represents not just the death of a warrior, but the extinction of a unique work of art that can never be replicated. Let us now consider the Custodians' relationship with the Void, because their fleet operations are an aspect of their military capability that is often overlooked in favor of their more visually dramatic ground combat. The Custodians operate their own fleet of highly advanced warships that exist outside the standard Imperial Navy classifications. These vessels range from battleship-sized capital ships to cruiser-class warships that patrol the Sol system, and their technology represents the same apex of Imperial capability that characterizes everything else in the Custodian arsenal. Custodian warships are equipped with ancient translocation bays, utilizing Godstrike pattern and veilbreaker pattern teleportariums. Technology so advanced that it can teleport even the massive Contemptor dreadnoughts directly into battle. These translocation chambers are permanently attended by high-ranking tech priests and blessed to such a degree that the air within them drifts with sanctified incense, the scent mixing with the chill of void-capable atmospheric systems and the ozone tang of activated teleportation fields. The Solar Watch operates the largest portion of the Custodian fleet, their vessels patrolling the approaches to Terra in a constant cycle of watchfulness that has continued uninterrupted for 10,000 years. But in the era Indomitus, as the Custodians have expanded their operational range, our other shield hosts have begun conducting void operations as well. The Dread host favors rapid insertion strikes, using their warships to close with enemy positions at maximum speed, before deploying boarding parties or orbital teleportation strikes. The Shadowkeepers use specially modified vessels for their recovery operations. Their ships, equipped with containment facilities, capable of holding the entities and artifacts they are tasked with recapturing. And the emissaries Imperatus travel aboard vessels that serve as both warships and diplomatic platforms, their golden hulls serving as a visible reminder of the Emperor's authority wherever they appear. The Custodians' relationships with other Imperial factions are defined by a unique combination of authority, respect, and occasional friction. While their legal position is unlike that of any other organization in the Imperium. Each Custodian is individually a lord of the Imperium, invested with authority that supersedes virtually all other Imperial hierarchies. Space Marines and Inquisitors alike are expected to kneel before them, a requirement that occasionally causes resentment among those who consider their own authority to be equally sacrosanct. The Inquisition, in particular, has a complicated history with the Custodians. The Inquisition claims the right to investigate any potential threat to the Imperium, regardless of its source, and this mandate has occasionally brought Inquisitors into conflict with the Custodians when their investigations have encroached upon matters that the 10,000 consider to fall under their exclusive jurisdiction. The defense of the Imperial Palace, the security of the Emperor's person, the contents of the dark cells, the operations of the Eyes of the Emperor, all of these are areas where the Custodians tolerate no outside interference, and Inquisitors who have pushed too hard have found themselves facing the quiet, implacable opposition of warriors who do not recognize their authority and cannot be compelled by their threats. These confrontations have invariably been resolved in the Custodians' favor, though the diplomatic fallout has sometimes required delicate management by those with a talent for smoothing ruffled feathers. The Adeptus Mechanicus views the Custodians with a complex mixture of reverence and frustration. The tech priests of Mars venerate the technology that the Custodians wield, seeing in their auramite armor and gravitic vehicles the echoes of the dark age of technology that the Mechanicus was founded to preserve and reclaim. But the Custodians' refusal to share their technological secrets is a source of perpetual irritation. The gene-wright families operate independently of Mars, their knowledge and techniques passed down through private lineages that owe no allegiance to the Fabricator General. The secret armories where Custodian Wargear is forged are located somewhere within the labyrinthine halls of the Imperial Palace, beyond the reach of the Mechanicus's hungry eyes. For an organization that believes all technology is sacred and should be maintained under their exclusive stewardship, the existence of an entire technological tradition that operates beyond their control is an affront that they have never quite learned to accept. The partnership between the Custodians and the Sisters of Silence deserves special attention because it represents one of the oldest and most effective military alliances in the Imperium's history. The Sisters of Silence, also known as the Anathema Psychana, are female warriors who carry the pariah gene, a rare genetic trait that renders them completely invisible to psychic perception and creates a field of psychic nullification around them. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Custodians and the Sisters of Silence formed the Talons of the Emperor, a combined force of staggering effectiveness that could engage any enemy in the galaxy with absolute confidence. First, the Custodians provided the raw combat power, the tactical genius, and the ability to operate independently across any battlefield. The sisters provided psychic denial, their blank nature creating zones of silence where the powers of the warp simply cease to function, rendering psychers helpless and demons insubstantial. This partnership fractured in the aftermath of the heresy, as both organizations withdrew into their own grief and their own vigils. But in the era Indomitus, under Trajan Valoris's leadership, the talons of the emperor have been reconstituted, and the results have been devastating for the enemies of humanity. Combined Custodian sister strike forces are now deployed against chaos targets with particular effectiveness. It's the sisters' psychic nullification complementing the Custodians' combat prowess to create a force that is almost uniquely suited to combating the demonic and the corrupt. Shield Captain Valerian and Sister Alea's partnership during the Defense of Terra and subsequent campaigns has become emblematic of this renewed alliance, demonstrating that the old bonds of cooperation can be restored even after 10,000 years of separation. The Custodians' relationship with Space Marines is perhaps the most nuanced of all their inter-organizational dynamics. On one level, the two groups share a common origin. Both were created by the Emperor, both carry some measure of his genetic legacy, and both exist to serve his will. But the differences between them are at least as significant as the similarities, and those differences have sometimes led to tension, misunderstanding, and even outright hostility. The Custodians were created to be individuals. Each one is a unique work of art, crafted through a process that emphasizes the development of autonomous thought, independent judgment, and personal excellence. Space Marines, by contrast, were created to be soldiers. They are products of a mass production process, standardized through gene seed and chapter culture, designed to function as parts of a greater whole rather than as independent agents. The Custodians fight as individuals who happen to be on the same battlefield. Space Marines fight as brothers, their combat effectiveness derived as much from their unit cohesion and collective tactics as from their individual capabilities. As this fundamental difference in design philosophy means that the two groups sometimes struggle to work together effectively. Space Marines find the Custodians arrogant and aloof, warriors who refuse to subordinate their individual judgment to the needs of a coordinated battle plan. Custodians find Space Marines rigid and predictable, warriors who are so dependent on their chapter's tactical doctrines that they struggle to adapt when those doctrines prove inadequate. Both assessments contain elements of truth, and both are ultimately unfair, but they persist because they reflect genuine differences in how these two types of transhuman warriors were designed to operate. There is also the matter of the Custodians' attitude toward the Space Marines' genetic heritage. The Custodians know, perhaps better than anyone, and the risks inherent in the gene seed process. They witnessed the creation of the Primarchs and the Legions during the Great Crusade, and they witnessed the heresy that followed. They understand that the very mechanisms that make Space Marines what they are, the gene seed, the implanted organs, the psycho-conditioning, also make them vulnerable to corruption in ways that Custodians simply are not. Half of the original legions fell to chaos, their gene seed tainted by the very forces they were created to oppose. This has left the Custodians with a deep, abiding wariness towards Space Marines that borders on institutional suspicion. They respect the Astartes as warriors, but they never fully trust them because they have seen firsthand what happens when that trust is misplaced. And the theme of trust and suspicion leads us naturally to one of the most profound philosophical questions that the Custodians grapple with in the silence of their enhanced minds: the nature of their own immortality and what it means for beings who are designed to endure. A Custodian does not age in the way that a normal human does. They do not grow old, do not develop the degenerative conditions that characterize the aging process in baseline humanity. They are, for all practical purposes, biologically immortal. But that immortality comes with a cost that is not immediately obvious, and that becomes apparent only over the course of centuries. The cost is not physical, but psychological. A Custodian who has lived for 500 years has watched dozens of mortal generations live and die. They have seen the children of the people they once knew grow old and pass away while they remain unchanged. The world around them shifts and evolves while they persist, anchored to a duty that never changes and a master who never speaks. Some custodians describe this experience as a form of geological existence, a way of being that has more in common with a mountain or a river than with a human life. They endure, they persist, they continue, but they do not progress in the way that mortal beings understand progression. There is no career advancement to aspire to, no family to raise, no legacy to build beyond the eternal execution of duty. There is only the vigil, stretching backward into memory and forward into a future that is indistinguishable from the present. This immortality also raises questions about the nature of identity over extreme timescales. Is a custodian who has lived for 1,000 years the same person they were at the beginning of their service? The memories of their early centuries grow distant and faded, replaced by the accumulated weight of more recent experiences. The personality traits that defined them as a young warrior are gradually reshaped by centuries of duty and contemplation. The philosophical positions they once held are challenged and refined, and sometimes abandoned entirely as new information and new experiences demand reassessment. At what point does the slow accumulation of change amount to the creation of a fundamentally different being? And if the answer is that it does, what does that mean for the concept of duty? Is the custodian who stands guard in the throne room today fulfilling the oath sworn by a different person centuries ago? These are not idle questions for the custodians. They are practical concerns that affect how individual warriors approach their service and how the order as a whole manages the psychological well-being of its members. The blood games, in addition to their practical function of testing the palace's defenses, serve as a form of psychological maintenance, providing custodians with novel challenges and experiences that break the monotony of eternal vigilance and help prevent the kind of psychological stagnation that could compromise their effectiveness. The debates and philosophical discussions that are a regular feature of life among the 10,000 serve a similar purpose, keeping their minds active and engaged even during the long periods between active deployments. Some custodians have dealt with the burden of immortality by developing what might be called a philosophy of the eternal present. They choose not to dwell on the past or anticipate the future, but to exist fully and completely in the moment, finding meaning and purpose in the immediate execution of their duty. Others take a longer view, seeing their individual existence as a single note in a symphony that spans millennia, their value lying not in what they experience personally, but in the contribution they make to a pattern too vast for any individual to comprehend. And still others, the ones who eventually become eyes of the emperor, will find that the burden has become too heavy to bear within the confines of the palace walls, and seek meaning in the wider galaxy, trading the certainty of their golden prison for the uncertainty of a universe that is vast enough, perhaps, to contain whatever it is they are searching for. The question of whether the custodians can truly be said to have free will is one that has occupied some of the finest minds within the Order for millennia. They were designed to be loyal. Their devotion to the Emperor was engineered into their very cells, built into the architecture of their brains, woven into the fabric of their consciousness at levels that predate conscious thought. Can a being whose loyalty was manufactured be said to have chosen to be loyal? Can a warrior whose courage was engineered be said to be truly brave? And these are questions that have no easy answers, and the custodians, to their credit, do not pretend otherwise. They acknowledge the paradox of their existence, the tension between designed purpose and authentic selfhood, and they live within that tension rather than trying to resolve it through easy platitudes or convenient self-deception. To truly appreciate the custodian's martial capability, it helps to examine specific campaigns in greater detail, because the dry recitation of battles won and enemies defeated does not convey the reality of what it is like to face the 10,000 on the field of war. Consider the war within the webway, which we touched upon earlier. but which deserves deeper examination because it was the defining conflict of the Custodian Order's history and the event that shaped everything that followed. When Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, attempted to send a psychic warning to the Emperor about Horus's betrayal, the sheer power of his transmission shattered the wards protecting the section of the webway that the Emperor had been working to open beneath the Imperial Palace. The breach allowed demons to pour into the tunnels of the webway in numbers that defied comprehension, and the Emperor was forced to divert his attention from his great project to the task of holding the breach closed through sheer psychic will. But the demons were not content to simply press against the barrier. They found ways around it, seeping through cracks and fissures in the webway's structure, and the Custodians were sent into the tunnels to hold them back. What followed was 5 years of continuous warfare in conditions that would have broken any other military force in the galaxy. The webway tunnels were not designed for combat. They were corridors of alien construction, their dimensions shifting and changing in response to psychic pressures that the Custodians could sense but not control. The demons came in waves, each one different from the last, their forms and tactics shaped by whatever dark intelligence directed their assault. Some were mindless beasts, hurling themselves at the Custodian lines in endless tides of claws and teeth. Others were cunning strategists, probing for weaknesses in the golden lines and exploiting any gap with ruthless efficiency. Still others were beings of such psychic power that their mere presence caused the walls of the webway to crack and bleed, the alien material unable to withstand the force of their unnatural existence. The Custodians fought in rotating shifts, each warrior spending days in the tunnels before being relieved by a fresh squad. But the demons did not need to rest, did not need to eat, did not need to sleep. They simply kept coming, an endless tide of malice that ground against the Custodian defenses like water against stone. The casualties were staggering. At the war's beginning, the Custodians numbered 10,000, the full strength of the Order assembled for the first and last time in their history. By the war's end, barely 1,000 remained. 9,000 Custodians, each one a masterwork of the Emperor's genetic artistry, each one the product of decades of painstaking creation, were destroyed in those dark tunnels. 9,000 unique works of art are lost forever to the consuming hunger of chaos. Tribune Diocletian Koros served as one of the senior commanders during the Webway War, and his account of the conflict, preserved in the Custodians' own archives, provides some of the most detailed and emotionally resonant descriptions of what the 10,000 endured. Diocletian described the slow, grinding nature of the war, the way each day brought new horrors and new losses, the way warriors who had stood beside you for centuries could be torn apart in moments by entities that operated outside the normal rules of physics and biology. He described the psychological toll of fighting enemies that could read your fears and manifest them in flesh, that could whisper your name and tell you exactly how you were going to die. And he described the moment when the Emperor, as speaking through the Golden Throne's Vox systems, ordered the Custodians to abandon the webway and seal the breach permanently, sacrificing the great project that had been the Emperor's dream for all of humanity in order to save Terra from the demonic tide. That moment, Diocletian would later reflect, was the true death of the Imperium's future. Everything that followed, the heresy, the siege, the 10,000 years of decline and stagnation, all of it flowed from that single decision. The Emperor had dreamed of giving humanity access to the webway, freeing them from dependence on the warp for interstellar travel, liberating them from the influence of the Chaos Gods. When Magnus shattered the wards, that dream died, and the Custodians were the ones who had to bury it. The training that produces warriors capable of enduring such trials deserves more detailed examination as well. We have discussed the bioalchemical transformation and the decades of combat training, but we have not fully explored the intellectual and philosophical education that accompanies the physical preparation. A Custodian's training includes extensive study of history, not just military history, but the full breadth of human civilization's development from its earliest days on ancient Terra through the rise and fall of interstellar empires during the Dark Age of technology and into the Age of Strife and the founding of the Imperium. This historical education serves multiple purposes. It gives the custodian a contextual framework within which to understand the threats they face, allowing them to recognize patterns and anticipate developments that warriors with a narrower perspective might miss. It provides them with the cultural literacy necessary to serve as the Emperor's companions and advisors, beings who can engage in conversation on any topic with the depth and insight that the master of mankind would expect from his closest attendants. And it reminds them, constantly and inescapably, of what is at stake. The custodians do not merely protect a being, they protect the architect of a vision that encompasses all of human civilization, a vision that has survived 10,000 years of war and suffering and still represents humanity's best hope for a future that is more than mere survival. The custodians are also trained in diplomacy, espionage, jurisprudence, and the administrative arts that govern the functioning of the Imperium. This might seem surprising for warriors whose primary function is combat, but it reflects the Emperor's original vision for the custodians as beings who would be more than mere bodyguards. He wanted companions, individuals whose intellectual depth and breadth of knowledge would make them worthy of conversation. The result is that a custodian can not only destroy an enemy army on the battlefield, but can also negotiate a treaty, adjudicate a legal dispute, analyze an intelligence report, or compose a piece of poetry with equal facility. They are, in the truest sense of the word, Renaissance warriors, beings whose capabilities encompass every aspect of human achievement, elevated to a superhuman level. And the physical training itself goes far beyond what any other military organization in the Imperium would consider sufficient. Custodians train constantly, not because they need to maintain skills that might otherwise atrophy, but because they are always seeking to improve, to find new techniques and approaches that can be added to their already staggering repertoire. The training facilities within the Imperial Palace include environments designed to simulate every conceivable battlefield condition, from zero-gravity void combat to fighting in the crushing pressures of deep ocean environments, from engagements in toxic atmospheres to battles in complete darkness against enemies that can only be detected through non-visual senses. Custodians regularly train against one another, which means that every training session is conducted against opponents of roughly equivalent skill, a situation that forces constant innovation and adaptation in a way that training against lesser opponents never could. The Colossea Auris, the great training arenas of the Imperial Palace, are vast spaces where the sounds of combat echo day and night without pause. Here, custodians practice the katas in their pure forms, moving through the stances and transitions of each fighting style with a precision that would seem mechanical, if not for the subtle variations that each warrior introduces, the personal flourishes and adaptations that transform standardized forms into individual expressions of martial art. The most senior warriors, those who have practiced for 1,000 years or more, move through the katas with an effortless grace that makes the most complex techniques look simple, their bodies and their weapons operating as a single integrated system where the boundary between warrior and weapon has become invisible. There is also the matter of the custodians' cultural practices, the rituals and traditions that give shape to their existence beyond the purely military. The naming conventions of the custodians are among the most distinctive of these practices. Each custodian receives a new name upon the completion of their transformation, a name that reflects their new identity as a member of the order. But this is not their final name. Throughout their service, custodians add to their name, each addition representing a significant achievement, a notable victory, or a profound experience that has shaped who they are. At the longest, custodian names can contain dozens of elements, each one a compressed narrative of some aspect of the warrior's history. Other custodians can read these names like a biography, understanding at a glance the major events and accomplishments of a warrior's career. The act of adding a new element to one's name is a personal ritual that the custodian performs alone, in silence, committing the new addition to memory and to the Order's records simultaneously. The custodians also maintain extensive archives within the Imperial Palace, records that chronicle not just their own history, but the history of the Imperium as seen through their unique perspective. These archives are among the most valuable historical resources in the galaxy, containing accounts of events that no other source has recorded, and perspectives on well-known historical episodes that challenge the official Imperial narrative. The Custodians have been witnesses to 10,000 years of human history, standing at the very center of the Imperium's power, and their records reflect that privileged position. Scholars from the Administratum and the Ordo Historica have occasionally been granted limited access to these archives, and the information they have obtained has reshaped the understanding of Imperial history in ways both subtle and profound. The art of the blood games, which we discussed earlier as a method of testing the palace's defenses, also serves as a way for the custodians to maintain their skills in areas beyond direct combat. And a blood game might require the participating custodian to assume a false identity and infiltrate the palace staff, testing the effectiveness of the security screening procedures. Or it might require them to hack into the palace's communications network, identifying vulnerabilities in the encryption protocols that protect sensitive information. Or it might involve the physical infiltration of a supposedly secure area, testing the watchfulness of the custodians on guard duty and the effectiveness of the automated defense systems. The variety of these exercises ensures that the custodians maintain a breadth of skills that extends far beyond what their role as bodyguards might seem to require, and the competitive nature of the games ensures that these skills are constantly being tested against the highest possible standard. Yeah, and there is a particular blood game that has become the stuff of legend within the Order, though its details are never discussed outside the most secure chambers of the Imperial Palace. It involves a custodian attempting to reach the Golden Throne itself, penetrating every layer of the palace's defenses to touch the foot of the throne without being detected. No one has ever succeeded. The defenses are simply too comprehensive, too layered, too vigilant. But the attempt itself is considered the ultimate test of a custodian's abilities, and those who come closest are regarded with a particular respect by their peers. The fact that no one has ever succeeded is, in itself, a source of quiet pride for the Order. It means the palace is secure. It means the Emperor is safe. It means the custodians have done their job. When in the strange and terrible landscape of the 41st millennium and beyond, where humanity teeters on the brink of extinction and the forces of chaos press in from every direction, the custodians endure as they were made to endure. They stand their watches in the golden halls. They patrol the dark corridors beneath the palace. They ride their jet bikes through the void between worlds. They carry the Emperor's authority to the far corners of a galaxy that has never been darker or more dangerous. And in the quiet moments between battles, in the brief pauses between crises, they contemplate the questions that have defined their existence for 10,000 years. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be more than human? What is the price of immortality, and is it worth paying? And what would the Emperor say if he could speak? And about what his golden children have become? These questions have no answers. Perhaps they were never meant to have answers. Perhaps the asking is itself the point, the restless seeking that keeps the custodians' minds sharp and their spirits vital even after millennia of unchanging duty. They were made to think, after all. They were made to question, to analyze, to understand. And in a galaxy where most beings accept their lot without complaint or contemplation, the custodians' refusal to stop thinking, to stop asking, to stop searching for meaning in an existence that was designed for them rather than chosen by them, might be the most human thing about them. The disappearance of Constantin Valdor after the Horus heresy remains one of the great mysteries, not just of the Custodian Order, but of the entire Imperium. Valdor was the first and greatest of all Custodians, a warrior whose name is spoken with the same reverence that Space Marines reserve for their primarchs. He was the Emperor's right hand during the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, and the Heresy, a being of such tactical brilliance and combat prowess that even the primarchs treated him with a wary respect. During the Great Crusade, it was Valdor who oversaw the deployment of the Custodians across multiple theaters of war, coordinating their operations with a strategic vision that encompassed the entire galaxy. It was Valdor who led the Blood Games, who set the standards that every subsequent Custodian has measured themselves against, who embodied the ideal of what it meant to serve the Emperor with absolute dedication and matchless skill. And then, sometime after the Heresy, yet he simply vanished. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. The Watcher's Axe, the great weapon that would become the symbol of the Captain Generalship, was created in his absence, and the office was filled by a succession of warriors who, however capable, operated in the shadow of a legend they could never fully escape. Rumors have persisted for 10,000 years about what happened to Valdor. Some believe he fell in some unknown battle, his body lost in a corner of the galaxy, too remote for recovery. Others suggest that he departed on a mission of such importance that its nature could not be revealed even to the rest of the Order. A darker theory holds that Valdor chose to leave, that the horror of the Heresy and the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne drove him to abandon the duty that had defined his existence, and seeking some purpose or some answer in the wider galaxy that could make sense of what had happened. And then there is the most persistent rumor of all, that Valdor is still alive, somewhere out there in the void, leading the most extensive network of eyes of the Emperor that the galaxy has ever seen, watching and waiting for the moment when the Emperor's greatest servant will be needed once more. The truth, whatever it may be, remains locked behind the silence that surrounds all matters relating to the highest levels of Custodian leadership. The Custodians do not discuss Valdor's disappearance with outsiders, and even within the Order, the topic is approached with a reverence that borders on taboo. His name is inscribed in the rolls of honor, alongside a simple notation: status unknown, service continuing. It is a small detail, but a telling one. The Order has never declared Valdor dead. They have never conducted funeral rites for their greatest warrior. They have never closed the book on his service. Whether this reflects genuine hope that he will return, institutional denial of an uncomfortable reality, or knowledge of circumstances that the wider Imperium is not permitted to share, remains a matter of speculation even among the Custodians themselves. But the mystery itself serves a purpose within the Order. Valdor's absence is a reminder that even the greatest of the 10,000 is ultimately expendable in the service of the Emperor's will. It is a humbling truth, and one that keeps even the most accomplished shield captain grounded in the understanding that their individual importance, however great it might seem in the moment, is ultimately secondary to the mission they serve. The political crises that the Custodians have navigated over the millennia also deserve more attention than they typically receive. The most significant of these was the Hexarchy, a period during the 32nd millennium when a cabal of corrupt High Lords of Terror attempted to seize absolute power over the Imperium. The Custodians, whose loyalty to the Emperor transcended any political allegiance, found themselves in a delicate position. They could not simply stand aside while the governance of the Imperium was subverted, but neither could they intervene directly without setting a dangerous precedent that might eventually be used to justify military coups by less scrupulous organizations. The resolution of the Hexarchy crisis required the Custodians to exercise political skills that their reputation as warriors might lead one to underestimate. Through a combination of diplomatic pressure, strategic displays of force, and the selective deployment of intelligence gathered by the eyes of the Emperor, the Custodians helped to dismantle the conspiracy and restore legitimate governance to Terra without ever having to fire a shot in anger within the palace walls. It was a masterclass in the kind of power projection that does not require violence to be effective, and it demonstrated that the Custodians' capabilities extended far beyond the battlefield. In the era Indomitus, the scale and frequency of Custodian operations have increased dramatically. Trajan Valoris's agreement with Robert Guilliman to expand the Order's extrasolar activities has resulted in more shield hosts being deployed beyond the Sol system than at any time since the Great Crusade. These deployments are guided by a sophisticated intelligence apparatus that combines the reports of the Eyes of the Emperor with data from oracular doomscryers and alpha-level astropathic intercepts to identify and prioritize threats to the Emperor's person and the stability of the Imperium. The result is a proactive defense strategy that seeks to eliminate threats before they can reach Terra, extending the Custodians' protective perimeter from the walls of the Imperial Palace to the borders of the galaxy itself. The specific operations conducted during this period illustrate the range and versatility of the Custodian military capability. In a single standard year following the ratification of the expanded mandate, Custodian forces conducted over 30 extrasolar strikes against targets ranging from chaos cult cells that had infiltrated planetary governments to genestealer cult infestations in systems dangerously close to the Sol system's outer approaches. The Dread Host led a devastating assault against a Wordbearer's warband that had established a demon forge on the fringes of the Segmentum Solar. Their teleportation strike materializing directly inside the forge's control room and destroying the facility's command structure before the Chaos Marines could mount a coherent defense. But the Shadowkeepers tracked down and recaptured 3 entities that had escaped from the Dark Cells during the Rift's opening. Operations that required not just military force, but specialized containment equipment and knowledge of binding rituals that dated back to the Age of Strife. The emissaries Imperatus established permanent embassies on several key worlds along the Indomitus Crusades route, their presence serving as both a reminder of the Emperor's authority and a forward intelligence-gathering post that could provide early warning of threats developing in regions far from Terra. The Solar Watch expanded its patrol routes to encompass the entire Sol system and the immediately adjacent star systems. They're deploying sensor networks and monitoring stations that created a web of surveillance so comprehensive that a vessel could not enter the system without being detected and tracked from the moment it dropped out of warp translation. And the Aquilan Shield quietly assigned protection details to over a dozen key Imperial figures, from sector governors to Cardinal World Archbishops, whose continued survival was deemed essential to the stability of regions critical to Terra's defense. These operations have not been without cost. The expanded mandate means that more Custodians are deployed in the field at any given time, which in turn means that more Custodians are exposed to the risks of combat and the 1,000 other dangers that the galaxy presents. The Order's casualty rate, while still low by the standards of other Imperial military organizations, has increased measurably since the beginning of the era Indomitus. For an Order that values each individual warrior as a unique and irreplaceable creation, every loss is felt keenly, and the debate within the Order about whether the expanded mandate is worth the cost continues to generate passionate discussion during the quiet hours between deployments. But for now, the consensus within the Order appears to favor the continued expansion of operations. The galaxy is more dangerous than it has been at any point since the heresy, and the threats to the Emperor's person and the Imperium's stability are more numerous and more varied than the Order's traditional defensive posture can adequately address. The Custodians have always adapted to the needs of the moment, from their earliest days as a handful of proto-warriors guarding a warlord on a devastated world to their current status as a galaxy-spanning force of golden transhuman demigods. The era Indomitus represents simply the latest evolution in a 10,000-year history of service, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to a duty that transcends the individual, the Order, and even the Imperium itself. It is the duty of the 10,000, and it will endure for as long as the Emperor requires their service, which is to say, for as long as there is an Imperium to protect and a galaxy to defend. If you have walked with me this far, through the genetic forges and the training halls, through the dark cells and the burning corridors of the webway, And through the political crises and the philosophical debates and the endless wars that have defined the Custodians' existence for 100 centuries, then perhaps you are beginning to understand something that cannot be easily summarized or reduced to a simple statement. The Custodians are not just warriors, though they are the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. They are not just guardians, though they have stood their watch for longer than most civilizations have existed. They are not just weapons, though they carry within their golden shells enough firepower to level cities and enough combat skill to defeat armies. They are something else entirely. They are the answer to a question that the Emperor asked at the very dawn of his Imperium. What would happen if you took the best raw material that humanity had to offer and shaped it, not into a tool or a weapon or a servant, but into something that approached perfection? Not the perfection of efficiency, not the perfection of obedience, but the perfection of potential, the realization of everything that a human being might become if the limitations of biology and circumstance were stripped away and replaced with capabilities that bordered on the divine. The answer, as it turns out, is complicated. The Custodians are magnificent, and they are tragic. They are superhuman, and they are profoundly, achingly, irrevocably alone in a way that no other beings in the galaxy can fully understand. They serve a master who cannot speak to them and protect a species that will never know them as anything other than distant, golden legends. They live forever, but their immortality is a burden as much as a blessing, each century adding weight to a duty that never lightens and never ends. They were designed to be the Emperor's companions, and in the cruelest irony of all, the process that made them worthy of that companionship has also ensured that they can never truly experience it. And so, we come to the end of our journey. We have walked the long and winding road from infant to custodian, from the noble houses of terror to the golden halls of the imperial palace, from the gene-wrights laboratory to the blood games and the battlefields of the galaxy. We have explored the science and the art of their creation, the philosophy and the practice of their existence, the glory and the tragedy of their 10,000-year vigil. What does it take to become a custodian? It takes everything. It takes your body, which is broken down to its most fundamental components and rebuilt into something that transcends the human template. It takes your mind, which is expanded and reshaped into an instrument of unparalleled cognitive capability. It takes your identity, which is dissolved and reformed around a new sense of purpose, so absolute that it becomes indistinguishable from who you are. It takes your childhood, which is surrendered to decades of agonizing transformation. It takes your connections to the species that birthed you, the emotional bonds and instinctive responses that bind humans to one another, and which are muted or removed to ensure that nothing interferes with the singular devotion to the Emperor that defines a custodian's existence. And in return, it gives you something that few beings in the galaxy will ever possess, a purpose so clear, so absolute, and so unwavering that it burns through the darkness of the far future like a golden flame, illuminating the path ahead, even when all other lights have gone out. The privilege of standing in the Emperor's shadow, of carrying his legacy within your very cells, of being one of 10,000 souls who have been deemed worthy of guarding the most important being in human history. Is it worth the price? That is a question that each custodian must answer for themselves. Art in the silence of their own enhanced minds, during the long watches of the night, when even the golden giants of terror must confront the fundamental questions of existence. The transformation that created them has given them the cognitive tools to grapple with such questions, but it has also taken away the emotional framework that most humans rely upon to find answers. A custodian who asks whether their existence is worthwhile must do so without the comfort of faith, without the warmth of companionship, and without the certainty that their answer is truly their own rather than the product of an engineering process that began before they could speak. And perhaps that is the final and most profound irony of the custodian condition. They were created to be the Emperor's companions, and beings of such intellectual depth and emotional complexity that even the master of mankind would find them worthy of conversation. But in making them what they are, the transformation has placed them beyond the reach of the very companionship they were designed to provide. They stand beside the Emperor, but he cannot speak to them. They serve among their peers, but they cannot truly connect with them. They protect a species that they can never fully rejoin. And yet they endure. They endure because that is what they were made to do. They endure because the alternative, failing the Emperor, is unthinkable. They endure because somewhere deep within their enhanced minds, in the organic portions of their brains that still retain the faintest echoes of the infants they once were, there lives a commitment to duty that transcends biology and programming and touches on something that might, if viewed from a certain angle, be called love. Perhaps the fact that they continue to serve, century after century, millennium after millennium, is answer enough. Perhaps the fact that they have not abandoned their post, have not surrendered to despair, have not allowed the slow erosion of their humanity to consume whatever spark of devotion still burns within them, is itself the most powerful testament to what it means to be a custodian. They were made to endure, and they do. They were made to protect, and they will continue to do so until the stars themselves grow cold and dark. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But within that war, there are those who stand as monuments to what humanity might become, if it could find the strength to reach beyond its limitations and grasp the golden threads of possibility. The Adeptus Custodes are those monuments. They are the Emperor's first and greatest creation, the living proof that the gap between human and divine is not a chasm, but a bridge, one that can be crossed by those with the courage to pay the price. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the Adeptus Custodes, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Q on 40k for more explorations of the stories, the characters, and the worlds that make Warhammer 40,000 one of the richest and most fascinating fictional universes ever created. Drop a comment below and let me know which aspect of the Custodians' lore you find most fascinating, or what topic you would like me to cover next. Until next time, stay golden.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.